Meanwhile, the necromancer had escaped, yet Levi was still unconscious inside Misty Valley, inside a still fragile Stormwind. Mia watched his face twist through pain and kept one hand near her sword. Wendy sensed no invading soul, which somehow made the silence even worse, as the White Wolf newcomers decided whether Levi's promises were worth trusting. What exactly had the ancient monster left behind inside Levi's mind? The answer was buried beneath a flood of memories that did not belong to him. When the necromancer entered Levi's spiritual sea, the system panel had reacted by itself. It devoured more than half the ancient's soul before the terrified mage could retreat. Those stolen memories crashed through Levi's mind like years of borrowed experience, with danger still nearby. He inherited the 7th-tier ghostly meditation technique and 7 brutal dark spells. Death Illusion, Death Touch, Summon the Dead, Corpse Poison, Shadow Binding, Shadow Explosion, and Shadowform. For one long moment, the threat in Misty Valley became an unexpected inheritance. Then Levi finally opened his eyes with his head resting on Wendy's lap. Clay rushed over, while Mia immediately pointed a blade at Levi's throat. Possession had already happened once today, and she refused to gamble twice, before Divine Eye reacted. Levi tried explaining that the necromancer had failed, but nobody could verify his claim. Wendy solved the problem in the most embarrassing way possible, as Stormwind's growing strength attracted attention from enemies hiding beyond its walls. She said the real Levi was still staring exactly where the old Levi would stare. Soon the entire group went quiet, and Levi sat up faster than any wounded man should. That humiliation cost him nothing, but the memories inside his head were worth a kingdom. The altar still remained, and its real purpose was far worse than a blood sacrifice. Levi identified it as a damaged passage leading directly into hell. The necromancer had survived by tying his soul to the passage itself, before word reached their enemies. Misty Valley was therefore holding a doorway that could turn the frontier into a battlefield. What happened if the wrong organization learned that doorway existed? Levi decided secrecy was safer than inviting more people into the valley. He placed an invisibility formation around the altar before preparing to leave. On the way out, Mia finally brought Levi to the surviving White Wolf tribe. Their people had been hunted, scattered, and pushed toward extinction for years, with Stormwind still exposed. They needed a home, and Stormwind needed soldiers who understood the mountains, as Levi quietly converted dangerous discoveries into tools the territory could actually use. Levi offered sanctuary, but every professional had to sign a service contract. Mia's people accepted because they already knew what kind of Lord Stormwind had become. For them, freedom without shelter meant another winter of graves. For Levi, several hundred refugees meant mouths, labor, scouts, and a new fighting unit. He immediately ordered the tribe to organize a White Wolf squadron for Stormwind's army. Garcia and Turo began counting warriors, families, craftsmen, children, and supplies, under another hidden threat. Levi also left the wolf dance formation protecting the pig-headed valley behind them. Niu Yi and Niu Er received control tokens and enough magic crystals to maintain it. A normal 5th-tier fighter would struggle to break through that valley now. Then Levi returned home with a new tribe following behind him, while Stormwind expanded faster than its young defenses could comfortably follow. Stormwind had started as a death sentence, but people were now choosing to enter it. Later, the White Wolf families received land instead of cages and military orders instead of chains. Turo took command while the adults learned Stormwind farming tools from human serfs. That simple scene changed more than any speech could have changed, as the territory expanded. People who expected another master were being shown fields they could call their own. Levi meanwhile turned back toward the territory's second spring planting season. The expanded population meant thousands of additional acres could finally be cultivated. He reserved a section of dry land specifically for wild sugar beets, under another hidden threat. Sugar had become future liquor, future trade, and future military funding for Stormwind. What if the safest weapon in Stormwind was something people could drink? Afterward, the answer would matter later, but Levi still had dangerous loose ends first. Auden remained alive, one-handed, enslaved, and full of information about the eldest prince. Levi extracted everything useful before arranging to hand him to Angelus's people, as Stormwind's growing strength attracted attention from enemies hiding beyond its walls. Clay confirmed that a tulip representative had already arrived at Grey Fortress. Before the transfer, Levi sensed someone following him through the fortress. The malice was faint, persistent, and too disciplined for an ordinary thug, as the territory expanded. Rather than confront the tale, Levi used the pressure to strengthen his own cover story. He met Rose, one of Angelus's people, and transferred both Auden and the assassin's corpse. Rose took one look at the dead 5th-tier Divine Eye Mage and reassessed her target. Elsewhere, the pretty husband exiled to die was collecting enemies that should have killed him already. Levi never admitted how much Stormwind had handled behind closed doors. When Rose asked about the destroyed Lanchi forces, his denial came without hesitation. Some lies protect pride. This one protected military strength, as Stormwind's growing strength attracted attention from enemies hiding beyond its walls. Back in Stormwind, Levi ordered a cavalry squadron built from men with riding talent. 300 warhorses were too valuable to remain scattered among infantry units, with Stormwind still exposed. He also continued learning magic instead of treating the territory as his only weapon. Petrification became his second Circle Earth spell, and the system pushed it to its limit. Then Little Kun began another breakthrough inside Storm Bay. Levi moved the narwhal 20 kilometers away before its dragon aura could attract predators. 3 days later, Little Kun reached the second tier and released even stronger dragon power. Wendy collected what she could while Levi strengthened the concealment around the area. The ocean held monsters Stormwind had never seen, and one leaked dragon aura could summon them. Levi then visited Panda and paid the bear the 6th-tier fire magic core he owed. The deal was expensive, but a reliable 8th-tier neighbor was worth more than gold. On the way back, Levi felt another pulse of hostility inside his own territory. This time the source was a bald owl watching him from the trees. Eventually the owl itself was weak, but the hatred behind its eyes belonged to someone else. Levi suspected a mage's familiar and decided to follow the Watcher instead of killing it. A captured petrel became the strangest intelligence asset Stormwind had ever recruited. The domination contract worked even on an ordinary bird, unlike conventional magical enslavement. 2 days later, the petrel returned and led Levi toward a hidden magician. Next, the intruder turned out to be a 4th-tier water archmage hiding inside northern woodland. Mia and Moto attacked while Levi deliberately avoided killing the mage at range. He wanted information more than a corpse, and the domination contract required a living mind. The fight lasted long enough to grind both sides down, while the newcomers settled. Then Levi multiplied his speed, closed the distance, and pinned the mage through the shoulder. An hour of mental resistance followed before the contract finally crushed the target's will. By then, the first question Levi asked was simple: "Who sent you here?" The answer brought an old enemy back into the room, while Stormwind expanded faster than its young defenses could comfortably follow. Around then, the mage served the Divine Eye Society. For one long moment, Stormwind's enemies stopped looking like isolated assassins. The society had begun mapping the territory itself, across the dangerous northern frontier. Levi learned their organization had gone even deeper underground after royal persecution. Communication between cells was limited, which made the captured spy valuable but safely expendable. Levi ordered the man to keep his cover and feed information when possible. Then he turned inward and reviewed Stormwind's growing strength, before another hidden enemy could turn useful knowledge into a fresh disaster. The territory now fielded dozens of professionals across knights, warriors, and mages, while the newcomers settled. John continued advancing, Wendy's life magic kept improving, and Mia remained Stormwind's strongest regular fighter. Clay's knights were finally becoming something closer to Levi's own force than Tulip property. From there, the better Stormwind ran without him, the more time Levi could spend learning magic. That was the real advantage of delegation, and Levi intended to exploit it mercilessly. 2 months of study pushed several combat techniques and spells to their current limits. The Flame Serpent Potion became Levi's next target because he needed faster knight advancement. Meanwhile, the recipe required Flame Serpent gallbladders, and the Savage Mountains held plenty of candidates. Levi took Mia, Wendy, Moto, and Clay's Warcraft Knights into the mountains. They hunted across the old goblin lands between Pig-Headed Valley and Gale Wolf territory. Moto eventually found signs of a 4th-tier Flame Serpent Queen preparing to lay eggs. Levi used earthquake magic to locate the nest before the serpent could escape. The group killed the queen quickly and recovered the gallbladder, hide, meat, and 6 intact eggs. Wendy believed the eggs might be hatchable and trainable, so Levi took those too. Nothing in Stormwind was allowed to remain only a trophy. A corpse became armor, meat became cultivation, eggs became possible magical beasts across the dangerous northern frontier. After 15 days, the hunting party had enough materials for roughly 180 potions. That supply was sufficient to push Levi toward the 4th-tier Grand Knight realm. Soon, the expedition should have ended there with a clean victory, as Stormwind's growing strength attracted attention from enemies hiding beyond its walls. Instead, Niuyi arrived at the Cane River carrying catastrophic news. Pig-Headed Valley had been attacked by a single 4th-tier fire archmage, with danger still nearby. The intruder also controlled a 4th-tier corpse demon puppet. Niuyi and Niur escaped, but the wolf dance formation had already been broken. Levi sent Wendy and Clay home with the serpent eggs and harvested materials. Then he took Mia, Moto, Niuyi, and Niur back toward the valley. The enemy was studying Levi's formation when they found him. That detail mattered more than the ruined valley itself, while the Shadow Temple's interest turned a frontier problem into something much larger. A wandering mage might steal. This one was searching with hell still nearby. Levi shifted enslavement contracts between New Yi and New Er to free one domination slot. If the mage survived, Levi intended to take everything inside his head. Mia attacked first while Moto and the Minotaurs closed the escape routes. Later, the evil mage responded with fire magic and tried to flee north, while Stormwind prepared desperately. Levi's meteor arrows tore into the retreat, striking the man's thigh, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. The corpse demon absorbed the remaining shots until Mia engaged it directly. Afterward, the battlefield tightened around the wounded mage one step at a time. Then the target stopped running and released something far worse than fire, while every defense mattered. Vengeful spirits spilled across the ground and clawed at the attacker's minds. A bloody heart appeared in the mage's hand, still beating inside his fingers. Levi recognized the aura before the ritual had even finished, around the unfinished North Castle. The passage to Hell was beginning to open again, before the Gale Wolf King could turn Stormwind's growth into one enormous graveyard. A spatial crack formed behind the mage while the system screamed a danger warning. Elsewhere, the descending presence belonged to a 6th-tier demon avatar. Levi fired repeatedly, but the spirits and hellish pressure ruined every clean shot. Moto shielded him from the worst of the impact while Levi forced his way forward. That defense cost Moto his life before Levi reached the ritual caster. The evil mage laughed because killing him would no longer stop the descent. So Levi changed the objective with the demon already pushing through, while every defense mattered. He grabbed the mage's head and forced the domination contract into a nearly exhausted mind. Pain ripped through both men while the hell rift widened behind them. The contract finally took hold seconds before the ritual crossed the point of no return. Levi ordered his new slave to cancel everything he still could, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. Eventually, the mage destroyed the sacrifice and attacked the rift with Firebird's fury. The demon on the other side called itself Count Salin and promised revenge. For 2 hours, Levi's group bombarded the crack until the world's laws repaired it. When the final darkness sealed shut, nobody celebrated Moto's empty place in formation. Next, the captured mage identified himself as Nez, a member of the Shadow Temple, and that name made the Divine Eye Society suddenly look like the smaller problem. Nez explained that the Shadow Temple served powers Levi wanted nowhere near Stormwind. Its members worshipped the Lord of Shadows, one of Hell's terrifying rulers, with North Castle unfinished. They traded flesh, souls, and sacrificial rituals for borrowed demonic power. Worse, Nez had not found Pig-Headed Valley by accident. The Shadow Temple had sensed the Hell Passage somewhere east of the Savage Mountains. Nez had been sent specifically to locate the source of that aura, while Levi's new strength still had to survive contact with 7th-tier power. That turned Misty Valley from a hidden danger into a ticking beacon, before Nelson could intervene. What happened when the temple stopped sending scouts and started sending armies? Levi finally accepted that secrecy alone could no longer protect the frontier. He planned to warn the kingdom without revealing everything he personally knew, before the next siege began. Before leaving, he searched Nice's belongings and found a small fortune. There were 20,000 gold coins, magic crystals, potions, spells, and a storage ring. By then, the prize Levi valued most was a 5th-tier fire meditation method, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. Nice also carried a bag of the dead containing spirits and a 4th-tier corpse demon. The bag's inner space functioned like a crude miniature hell built from death energy. Levi had inherited enough necromancer knowledge to understand exactly how useful that was. He released Nice back into the mountains under orders to continue pretending loyalty. Bringing a marked Shadow Temple servant home would have painted Stormwind with a target. Instead, Nez became an unwilling listening post inside an organization Levi feared. Levi then had Klein report abnormal death energy around Misty Valley to the kingdom. He deliberately avoided naming the passage or the Shadow Temple in the official report. If the kingdom investigated, Levi wanted powerful people standing between Stormwind and Hell. Back home, he summoned John and changed the young mage's future overnight, while every defense mattered. Around then, the captured explosive meditation technique could eventually reach far beyond John's current level. Levi offered the first 4 stages and matching spells in exchange for accumulated territorial merit. John accepted without hesitation, even though switching methods meant rebuilding years of meditation. For a common mage, that delay still beat spending a lifetime trapped below the 4th tier. Levi also revealed that the complete technique could reach the 9th tier. The promise landed harder than gold because John had never imagined a road that long. Then Levi turned to his own cultivation and rebuilt his mixed meditation foundation again. The panel fused more elemental methods into the growing chaos meditation technique. His strange path was becoming something ordinary mages would consider impossible, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. Levi pushed his night training as well and finally crossed another major threshold. From there, the 4th-tier Grand Knight realm opened beneath his feet after months of accumulated preparation. That breakthrough unlocked another innate talent through the system. As the Northern Danger grew, ultimate power doubled his physical strength, battle aura, and magical mental force immediately. Levi did not stop at the basic version. He poured energy essence into the talent until the multiplier reached 5 times. Speed, defense, precognition, domination, and now raw power were stacking on one body. What level was Levi actually fighting at more? He had no clean answer, which was exactly why he kept his cards hidden. The territory continued developing while Levi tested his new limits, around the unfinished North Castle. North Castle neared completion, and its design made the entire complex a military engine. Storm cannons, storm ballistae, workshops, barracks, and training grounds concentrated behind reinforced walls. Levi ordered another 3,000 serfs purchased before winter shut construction down. He wanted young men for labor and training, plus women to stabilize future settlements. Then Clay returned with news Levi had hoped not to hear. Meanwhile, the Church of Dawn was waiting near the Cane River and wanted Levi personally. Klein had reported Misty Valley, and that report had climbed much higher than expected. The man waiting for Levi was Pastor Nelson, a 9th-tier priest of the Dawn Church. Levi approached the old man expecting interrogation, and received holy light instead, as the approaching wolf pack forced every unfinished defense into immediate service. Nelson flooded Levi's spiritual sea with divine power and told him to comprehend it. Soon, the light left behind a holy light meditation technique and a divinely bestowed curse removal spell. Even the Dawn priests around them stared when Levi described what he had gained. A divine spell meant unusual affinity and potential reaching toward the Saint realm. Levi cared less about prophecy than one practical detail, under the approaching wolf threat. His chaos meditation technique had just gained another usable element. Then Nelson casually revealed why Levi had been summoned at all. Angeles had asked her teacher to help Levi obtain a 4th-class military merit. That single sentence exposed a relationship Levi had never known existed before the next siege began. The terrifying Marcus Angeles had grown up close enough to Nelson to call in favors. Nelson even offered Levi a path into the Church of Dawn as a priest. Levi refused immediately because becoming clergy meant surrendering his lordship, while Nelson's arrival proved Misty Valley had attracted powers far above Stormwind. Stormwind was dangerous, expensive, and exhausting, but it was his. Nelson accepted the refusal and ordered Levi to lead the expedition toward Misty Valley. The church group was absurdly powerful compared with anything Levi normally commanded. A 9th-tier priest stood beside 8th-tier and 7th-tier experts like ordinary escorts, while every defense mattered. Klein and Levi were effectively guides carrying information into a war they wanted to avoid. When they reached the valley, Nelson cleared the magical fog with a casual wave. 3 hours later, the group stood before the hidden hell passage. Later, the latter vanished from every senior church member who sensed what waited beyond it. Bishop Sina immediately demanded secrecy, while Nelson noticed Levi's invisibility formation, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. Levi admitted they had fought an ancient necromancer here and driven him away. Then he deliberately mentioned the Shadow Temple, before Panda faced the Wolf King. That name changed every face around the altar. The church stopped treating Misty Valley as a damaged ruin and started treating it as a front line. Nelson and Sina constructed an 8th-tier holy light array around the passage. Pansy and other experts remained behind to defend it, around the unfinished North Castle. Levi and Klein were finally carried out of the mountains after 10 exhausting days. Klein wanted compensation for being dragged into a nightmare he never volunteered to join. Levi promised him liquor and privately considered that a cheap price, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. Autumn harvest had already begun when Levi returned to Stormwind. He resumed magic study while the territory stored grain and prepared for winter. Clay purchased materials for a bag of the dead and brought back 2 master blacksmiths. Levi used 6th-tier magical beast hide and necromancer stones to craft his own version. Afterward, the finished bag contained more than 300 square meters of death-filled space. That was enough room for an undead force far larger than anything Nez carried. Before Levi could test it properly, the system delivered another warning. A peak 7th-tier Gale Wolf King was coming for Stormwind in 5 days. The king brought 2 6th-tier wolves, 4 5th-tier wolves, and a large pack behind them. Levi went straight to Panda because no ordinary fortress plan could solve that problem. Panda confirmed the reason immediately. The aging Wolf King needed one final breakthrough. Devouring Panda's 8th-tier flesh might force that breakthrough before age killed the wolf. Elsewhere, the same desperation made the Wolf King more dangerous than ever, while Stormwind prepared desperately. Panda had recovered only to the 7th tier, but its 8th tier foundation still remained. 1 against 1, the bear believed it could kill the Wolf King. The real problem was the pack willing to die for its ruler. while Nelson's arrival proved Misty Valley had attracted powers far above Stormwind. Levi calculated the battlefield like a merchant calculating debt. One 7th-tier predator meant extinction, 200 wolves meant ammunition, casualties, and opportunity. He proposed a joint defense using North Castle, magic crossbows, storm cannons, Klein, and Panda. Panda warned that failure would destroy everything Levi had built before the wolf pack arrived. Levi answered that refusing the battle would destroy Stormwind more slowly. That left only one rational choice: kill the pack now, with hell still nearby. Clay raced to Grey Fortress to exchange accumulated merits for heavy magical crossbows. Levi personally asked Klein to help contain one 6th-tier Gale wolf, before the Shadow Temple could turn secret interest into open intervention. Klein stared at the request because helping meant risking his command and military career. After weighing the risk, Levi agreed to the plan anyway. He even released fortress weapons from inventory before their official replacements had arrived. If Grey Fortress suffered an attack during that window, Klein could lose everything. For one long moment, friendship on the frontier became something heavier than a signed contract. Levi evacuated Stormwind's civilians toward the islands around Storm Bay. North Castle became the chosen battlefield because its walls were new, reinforced, and expendable. The empty fortress filled with crossbows, ammunition, catapults, and soldiers preparing for one violent day. Klein arrived and finally saw the weapons that had been earning Stormwind impossible military merits. The storm cannons looked crude until he saw the boulders stacked beside them. Then the scale of Levi's hidden military industry became painfully obvious under the approaching wolf threat. By noon the next day, Panda smelled the pack before human scouts saw anything. Eventually, the bear returned to full size and charged west to meet the Wolf King first. Their collision shook the wilderness long before the wolves entered bow range. Panda deliberately retreated toward North Castle while keeping the Wolf King engaged. The pack followed, exactly as Levi needed, before Panda's duel with the Wolf King could drag Levi into the same grave. Then every prepared weapon along Stormwind's defenses opened fire together, while every defense mattered. Boulders crashed through wolves packed too tightly to dodge. Magic crossbows targeted higher-tier beasts while storm ballistae tore lanes through the charge. Mia and the wolf dance formation contained dangerous wolves trying to break the line. Klein engaged one 6th-tier enemy while Levi took responsibility for the other. Next, the castle walls became a grinder built from mathematics, steel, and terrified discipline. What should have been the Wolf King's supporting pack became a field of collapsing bodies. The king noticed the losses and tried to shift the 7th-tier battle toward North Castle. Panda answered by drinking Levi's strongest liquor in the middle of combat, as the northern danger grew. By then, the Gale Wolf King watched the bear begin staggering and thought exhaustion had finally won. Instead, Panda entered the drunken state that had once changed its entire cultivation path. Every clumsy step became a perfect dodge, before Panda's duel with the Wolf King could drag Levi into the same grave. Every lazy paw landed where the Wolf King had just committed its weight. The predator that ruled this region was suddenly being humiliated by a swaying bear. Furious, the Wolf King called its 6th-tier wolves back for support. Klein held his opponent, but Levi could not completely stop his own, with hell still nearby. He mixed earth magic into close combat and raised walls to delay every retreat route. Clay redirected crossbows and archers to keep lesser wolves from surrounding Levi. Around then, the plan worked long enough for the pack to be cut down below the 4th tier. Then the Wolf King made the move nobody expected. It ordered the survivors to sacrifice themselves against Panda and broke toward Levi. Panda rushed to intercept, exposing itself exactly as the old wolf intended, while Stormwind's cannons became the only answer to enemies stronger than its soldiers. A storm breath struck the bear in midair and drove it into the ground. The Wolf King tore into Panda before anyone could recover, under the Shadow Temple's attention. Claws opened the bear's chest while fangs ripped flesh from its leg. Then a wind-coated paw punched directly through Panda's heart. The next impact threw the massive bear hundreds of meters toward Levi, with hell still nearby. North Castle went silent for a heartbeat because their strongest fighter had just fallen. A wounded Wolf King still stood between Stormwind and survival, as the approaching wolf pack forced every unfinished defense into immediate service. Panda forced itself upright while blood ran from the hole in its chest. From there, the bear burned one last technique and dropped a 6th-tier wolf from the sky. Then Panda told Levi the price of continuing. Panda said their only remaining option was a life contract, while Stormwind prepared desperately. The contract would bind their lives, share vitality, and make either death fatal to both. Panda could borrow Levi's life force long enough to repair its destroyed heart. Levi hesitated because the agreement sounded more permanent than any slavery ring. Panda snapped that the bear was the one losing centuries of potential lifespan here. Under those circumstances, that dangerous argument sounded strangely convincing. Levi opened his spiritual defenses and accepted the contract, Before the kingdom's strongest forces launched an operation into territory they barely understood. Meanwhile, the bond formed instantly, followed by pain so violent his knees hit the ground. Life force poured out of Levi and into Panda's shattered body, while Stormwind counted its dead. The battlefield disappeared behind blackness as Levi finally lost consciousness. When Levi opened his eyes again, warm water surrounded him inside Wendy's laboratory. He had been unconscious for an entire month after lending Panda his vitality. Wendy had stayed beside him through the recovery and nearly cried when he moved. Soon, the reunion became awkward almost immediately, because neither of them had been dressed for modesty. Wendy fled the pool faster than any healing mage Levi had ever seen. Then Panda's irritated voice entered Levi's mind from somewhere beside the water. The bear had survived, and the Gale Wolf King had not, during the Shadow Temple crisis. After Levi collapsed, Panda recovered enough strength to keep fighting, before one hidden attacker turned a successful operation into Levi's personal catastrophe. The Wolf King assumed Panda's repaired heart was only a final burst of desperation. That mistake lasted until the old predator was too exhausted to escape. Panda eventually mounted its back and beat the peak 7th tier king to death. Then the bear killed the remaining 6th tier wolf before collapsing beside Levi. One enemy had nearly erased Stormwind. Its corpse now belonged to Stormwind instead. Levi immediately asked what kind of contract could steal another person's life force. Panda finally revealed its species had never truly been an Earth Bear variant. Its people were the Panda clan, outsiders who originally came from another plane. They had entered Noah long ago as allies during an ancient interdimensional war. Later, the life contract was a Panda secret designed for partnerships with intelligent short-lived races. Both sides shared vitality, lifespan, and even portions of comprehension through the bond. Panda species lived roughly 4 times longer than humans under comparable conditions, after Angelus revealed her strength. That meant Levi had accidentally extended his own lifespan by centuries. For a man who originally wanted only to survive the frontier, that was a ridiculous upgrade. Panda also explained that higher cultivation could extend their shared future even further. The contract that nearly killed Levi had become one of his most valuable treasures. Then came the price of victory that no system panel could hide, while Levi watched nobles cooperate publicly and calculate against each other privately. Stormwind had lost hundreds of soldiers during the Gale Wolf battle, under pressure from greater powers. Jenkins reported 343 dead and 56 permanently disabled. 8 professionals were among the dead, while several combat companies had been badly mauled. For one long moment, military merit sounded meaningless beside those numbers. Every body represented a household that had trusted Levi's pension promise, with Stormwind still recovering. Afterward, the territory's weapons had suffered almost as badly, while Levi watched nobles cooperate publicly and calculate against each other privately. Nearly every storm ballista on the walls had been destroyed during the final assault. Most of the heavy magical crossbows were damaged or lost as well. Those shattered weapons represented months of battle merit converted into twisted metal. Still, the Gale Wolf Pack had been completely eliminated, while Stormwind counted its dead. More than 200 magical beast corpses now filled Stormwind's storage and workshops. Meat could accelerate cultivation, hides could become armor, and magic cores could buy replacements. Levi announced a future professional academy for the children of officers and professionals. The announcement hit his veterans harder than another bonus payment could have done. Their children could receive training once reserved for noble families. That promise turned a brutal victory into something families might actually inherit, before the passage collapsed. Levi then retreated back into magic study while Stormwind rebuilt, while North Castle repaired damage that gold alone could never fully replace. 25 days later, he crossed into the 4th tier Archmage realm. His chaos meditation technique now carried earth, water, fire, wind, light, and darkness. 3rd circle wind and fire spells joined his growing arsenal as winter covered the frontier. Literacy classes opened, because Levi refused to build an academy for children who could not read. Then New delivered a message from Nez that changed the winter entirely. Elsewhere, the Shadow Temple had found Misty Valley. Nez had been ordered to rejoin a main force already moving toward the Hell Passage. Levi sent an emergency warning through Grey Fortress and the nearest Dawn Church contact. The response had to come from people stronger than anything Stormwind could field. Inside Misty Valley, Pansy was already fighting to preserve the Holy Light Array. The first Shadow Temple force included 8th tier and 7th tier experts supported by mages. Neither side could break the other, so the battle became a race for reinforcements. Eventually, the Dawn Church reached the royal family before that race was decided, before betrayal changed everything. Paladin Redman became part of the first emergency group rushing north. The capital meanwhile began preparing a second wave drawn from the kingdom's greatest families. One mistake in that reinforcement plan could leave a permanent door to hell open. Next, the political battle in Kanglen became almost as sharp as the fighting in Misty Valley. Earl Pierce challenged Angelus's ability to provide the forces expected from a Marcus family. He assumed the Tulip family's internal factions had left her too weak to comply. Angelus answered by baiting him deeper with every sentence, before one hidden attacker turned a successful operation into Levi's personal catastrophe. When Pierce demanded proof, she proposed a noble duel between the families. That threat forced Pierce to raise his own commitment instead of backing away. Then Angelus removed the artifact hiding her true aura. Before the passage collapsed, a 7th-tier Archmage stood where everyone remembered a 5th-tier young Marcus. At 23 years old, Angelus had reached a level almost nobody expected. Pierce had built the trap himself and stepped into it with both feet. The Dalton family now had to send twice the force of a Marcus household. Angelus planned to go personally, partly because Nelson would command the operation, while Levi watched nobles cooperate publicly and calculate against each other privately. Her own family problems could wait until the Hell Passage stopped threatening the continent. By then, the Shadow Temple's reinforcements reached Misty Valley first, with Panda's life tied to Levi. Their force included 2 9th-tier threats that immediately changed the scale of the battle. One was Gustav, a Saint-level terror crocodile who had sided with the Shadow Temple. The other was Prince Odd, a 9th-tier giant elephant demon summoned from hell. That demon's arrival meant the passage could become known to even more hellish rulers. Redman and the Dawn Church defenders stayed inside the Holy Light Array and waited. More reinforcements approached, but everyone was running out of time. Levi should have remained safely outside that nightmare, while Stormwind counted its dead. Instead, curiosity brought him near Grey Fortress at exactly the wrong moment. Nelson passed overhead, noticed Levi and Panda, and pulled both into his traveling group. Levi asked where they were going even though the direction already answered him. Nelson needed 4th and 5th-tier mages to help operate a formation around the passage. Levi asked whether refusal was still an option, before the Shadow Temple could turn the passage into a permanent road from hell. Nelson's pleasant expression somehow made the answer feel even less negotiable. Panda stomped Levi's shoulder because following Levi had just become extremely expensive again. Then Nelson noticed the bear's lingering injuries and healed them completely with divine power. That single treatment removed the strongest complaint either of them could make, under pressure from greater powers. Nelson even gave Panda a spatial rune for use after reaching the 9th tier. If everything went wrong, that rune could teleport Panda directly to Nelson's location. The old priest also hinted that Panda's life contract with Levi would become valuable later. Levi wanted details, but Nelson offered only the kind of smile that created more questions. By the time they reached Misty Valley, Saint-level combat was already shaking the landscape. 5 9th-tier figures fought outside while formations battled inside the defensive perimeter. Around then, the Shadow Temple had built a Necromancer array to erode the Holy Light Array. Nelson ignored the outer stalemate and focused on destroying the passage itself. He ordered a Holy Spirit array built near the portal using extremely expensive magic cores. More than 20 lower-tier mages were assigned to keep the outer formation running. Levi became one of them, exactly as Nelson had promised, while Levi watched nobles cooperate publicly and calculate against each other privately. Then the goddess Scepter opened the passage wider, after Angelus revealed her strength. Death energy poured through, followed by demons and undead packed behind the opening. The sight looked less like an army than an entire world pressing toward one crack. Nelson answered with 9th-tier holy light that erased whole sections of the horde. Other Dawn priests fired beams through the entrance, while Saint-level fighters charged inside. More than 60 experts followed them into hell to destroy the passage from the other side. Levi stayed outside operating the formation and using curse removal against corrupting energy. Then he saw someone entering with the main force who should not have surprised him anymore. And standing among the attackers below was Angelus herself. She carried the aura of a 7th-tier Archmage and walked into hell with the assault team. Their eyes met for a moment before combat swallowed the opening, under pressure from greater powers. Then Levi felt powerful malice from an 8th-tier Sky Warrior nearby. He warned Panda immediately and marked the man's face in memory, while North Castle repaired damage that gold alone could never fully replace. Hours later, the internal foundation of the passage finally began collapsing. Wounded 6th-tier and 7th-tier fighters stumbled back through the shrinking doorway, with Stormwind still recovering. Several attackers crossed the passage, while others never returned. Nelson emerged with several Saint-level survivors and immediately stabilized the collapse. Angelus came out too, pale and exhausted but alive, as Stormwind's survival increasingly depended on alliances Levi could not completely trust. She walked over to Levi and asked how her exiled husband had ended up here. Levi answered carefully and refused to let her expression pull him into old habits. That small change surprised Angelus more than he expected, with Panda's life tied to Levi. From there, the passage narrowed while everyone assumed the worst danger had passed. Then the hidden 8th tier Sky Warrior finally launched his attack. A 7th tier magic net expanded across Levi and Panda, sealing their power before Panda could grow. Angelus teleported clear, proving she had also been prepared for betrayal after Angelus revealed her strength. The attacker used Levi as a shield when Angelus countered with Gathering Sun. Then he dragged Levi and Panda straight toward the collapsing Hell Passage, as Stormwind's survival increasingly depended on alliances Levi could not completely trust. Angelus followed instead of watching them disappear. Meanwhile, the three crossed the threshold moments before the entrance destabilized again, while the frontier watched. Outside, Nelson changed the passage's exit location and continued sealing it. He showed no panic, which only made his private plan more suspicious. Brennus nearly attacked the church leadership when he learned Angelus remained inside, while North Castle repaired damage that gold alone could never fully replace. Nelson insisted she had entered voluntarily and would find a way home, with Stormwind still recovering. The Dalton family immediately became the focus of suspicion because the attacker was their warrior. Earl Pierce denied ordering anything and surrendered himself to investigation. 3 days later, the remaining Saint-level fighters returned from pursuit without killing Prince Odd. Soon the Hell Passage finally healed completely behind them. Inside Hell, none of that mattered to Levi before the Hell operation began. The 8th tier warrior believed the collapsing passage had already sentenced Levi and Panda to death. Panda burned through the weakened net and forced itself back to full size. The attacker tried bluffing about a demon prince waiting nearby, before one hidden attacker turned a successful operation into Levi's personal catastrophe. Levi's precognition detected no 9th tier danger within range, so he called the lie immediately. Panda stopped hesitating and beat the Sky Warrior apart with drunken intent. When the body died, a shadow avatar burst free and tried to escape. Panda burned that shadow too before it could carry anything useful away, while the frontier watched. Later, the warrior had been controlled by an 8th tier dark mage rather than acting independently. That answer cleared the Dalton family slightly, but it did nothing for Levi's location. Behind them, the only road home had already vanished. Hell did not look like fire and screaming sinners from old Earth stories. It looked like a dead world built under 9 pale suns. Levi quickly learned that Hell was divided into 9 layers with stronger rulers deeper below. The broken passage had somehow thrown them onto a different level than expected. That explained why the Sky Warrior's promised demon prince never appeared, before another high-tier demon discovered 3 outsiders hiding inside its territory. Panda shrank again, and Levi hid his living aura beneath a captured dark cloak. They moved before the battle attracted an undead swarm large enough to trap them. A headless 8th tier corpse became loot instead of a funeral problem, inside the hostile 6th layer. Its storage ring held money, potions, enchanted armor, and the valuable 7th tier magic net. Levi wore the stronger armor and stored the net for a future trade. Then the pair began looking for somewhere Panda could safely attempt a 9th tier breakthrough. If Panda advanced, Nelson's spatial rune might finally become their exit. That plan required months in a world where living flesh counted as food. For one long moment, Levi's survival strategy became brutally simple. Hide, learn, keep Panda alive, do not anger anything stronger than them, with no road home. They eventually reached the misty swamp on the 6th level of Hell, as every deal between Levi and Angelus quietly changed their old political relationship. Its fog corroded souls and discouraged most weaker undead from entering. That made the swamp dangerous enough to become useful shelter. Levi enslaved a 5th tier pig demon viscount to serve as guide and local disguise. Then Panda sensed distant fire magic somewhere deeper inside the swamp, inside the hostile 6th layer. Levi followed because only one 7th tier fire mage he knew should be hiding here. 10 days of searching finally brought them near a violent battle. Angelus stood surrounded by demons and undead several levels above most ordinary threats. 2 8th tier enemies and several 7th tier fighters pressed her from every side, before another high tier demon discovered 3 outsiders hiding inside its territory. Her body burned like living flame while innate fire spells kept the encirclement from closing. Levi had complained about Angelus for months, but watching her fight answered one question. She had survived the Tulip family for a reason, with no road home. Panda attacked first and smashed a 7th tier wraith before the enemy understood what arrived. Then it charged the Duke of Blood Lake, the demon who had organized the hunt. Afterward, the Duke immediately pulled his strongest subordinates away from Angelus to protect himself. That outcome was exactly what Levi had been waiting for. Panda told Angelus where to retreat while Levi stayed hidden near the escape route. When 6th tier demon pursuers entered the bushes, Levi struck from concealment. His enchanted sword punched through one demon count's chest and shattered the demonic core. Energy essence flowed in while Angelus turned and killed another pursuer, under constant demonic pressure. The remaining enemies fled because whatever reward Blood Lake offered no longer covered death. Levi tried killing Count Salin, the demon who had once threatened him through a summoning rift. Salin escaped wounded, leaving Levi with another enemy who now knew his face. Angelus finally reached safety and nearly collapsed after the pursuit ended, before another high-tier demon discovered 3 outsiders hiding inside its territory. She had been fighting for too long and needed serious recovery time. Levi brought her back into the deepest part of the Misty Swamp. There, he discovered another strange benefit of Hell. Before the spatial rune worked, dark magic was dramatically easier to study inside a world saturated with death energy. In barely 10 days, Levi mastered a 4th circle dark spell much faster than usual. Angelus woke while he was practicing and quietly studied the husband she barely recognized. Elsewhere, the information she had known described an earth mage. The man in front of her now used darkness, wind, fire, water, and more. Levi wisely never volunteered any explanation for those missing details, while the spatial rune remained useless until Panda completed the 9th tier breakthrough. Instead, Angelus stole the 4th tier tombstone of the dead he had moved beneath her. When Levi noticed, she calmly turned the stolen artifact into a teaching opportunity. The tombstone could help him form a dark magic tower and awaken an innate spell. Angelus taught him how talent spells were created from mastered spell structures, while death energy surrounded them. Levi refined the tombstone and drew his dark knowledge into the forming tower. Eventually, the final spell appeared on the system panel as Hell Apostle. Any living enemy Levi personally killed could become an undead servant 1 level weaker. Those servants could remain in Hell until summoned, removing the need for corpse storage. That was Summon the Dead stripped of nearly every inconvenient limitation. Levi upgraded the spell immediately to match his current magic realm, before Panda reached 9th tier. What did a lord with 1 body need most during war? An army he could carry without feeding, as Levi learned Hell could become both a prison and an enormous cultivation resource. Angelus warned him to report unusual dark magic openly to the Dawn Church. Registered necromancy was dangerous. Hidden necromancy could make Levi look like an evil mage. Once Angelus recovered, their conversation finally turned toward escaping Hell. Angelus asked whether Panda still carried a spatial coordinate linked to Noah. Panda did, but the rune could only activate once the bear entered the Saint Realm. That meant the entire group now depended on 1 breakthrough, before the spatial rune worked. Angelus gave Panda 3 7th tier fire magic cores to accelerate the process. Panda claimed the gift could shorten several months of cultivation dramatically, before another high-tier demon discovered 3 outsiders hiding inside its territory. Levi suspected the bear was exaggerating and Angelus clearly suspected the same thing. After that exchange, nobody bothered demanding the cores back from Levi, before Panda reached 9th tier. While Panda began advancing, Levi and Angelus settled into an uneasy temporary partnership. Angelus asked about the 7th tier magic net recovered from the controlled Sky Warrior. Levi immediately assumed she wanted to take it for free. Instead, she offered to buy it because Stormwind needed resources more than a 7th tier restraint artifact. Levi demanded potion formulas, training methods, and other things until Angelus nearly laughed at him. The bargaining eventually settled on specific resources Stormwind desperately lacked. Levi received 3rd tier and 4th tier mage training potion recipes, while the hostile world around them rewarded dark magic and punished ordinary caution. He also received a 4th tier city protection formation called the Guardian of the 4 Kings. In return, Angelus took the 7th tier magic net under a royal seal contract. Next, the deal also included Clay's Knight Squad becoming fully Stormwind property, inside the hostile's 6th layer. That mattered more than another chest of gold. The men who had followed Levi from Tulip territory were finally his permanent soldiers. By then, the Ice Crystal Potion recipe solved one problem while creating another. Its key ingredient grew only in extreme cold or high mountain regions, while their escape remained uncertain. Levi stored the formula anyway, because future problems were still worth owning, while the spatial rune remained useless until Panda completed the 9th tier breakthrough. Months passed in Hell while Panda advanced and Angelus healed. Outside, Nelson quietly moved into Stormwind instead of returning to the capital, with no road home. He inspected Levi's workshops, defenses, farms, and strange inventions with obvious interest. Clay treated the 9th tier priest like a visiting catastrophe he desperately wanted to impress. Uninvited spies began appearing around the territory once news of Levi's disappearance spread. Nelson removed them so quietly that Stormwind never even learned how many had come. That invisible protection preserved the territory during Levi's absence. Far north, a brutal snowstorm struck the Orcish plains, while Nelson's emergency decisions kept the territory alive by abandoning exposed positions. Small clans lost livestock, food stores, and entire settlements beneath the winter disaster. The 4 orc royal families gathered because spring now threatened famine and internal collapse. Their solution was predictable. Head south and steal what humans had, while Panda completed its breakthrough. The old agreement limited full-scale invasions, so they searched for a loophole. They would attack only selected human states instead of mobilizing against everyone. Around then, the Alpha Kingdom and Blackrock became the chosen targets, with enemy armies moving south. Behemoth King Achilles hinted he already had another plan inside Alpha territory, as the Alpha Kingdom lost cities, soldiers, and time with every passing day. That sentence would matter far more than the coming snowmelt. By February of the new year, orc armies were already crossing the Savage Mountains early. Other human kingdoms protested until the Orc Empire called the invasion a private campaign. Once outsiders believed only limited forces were involved, they stopped mobilizing. Alpha and Blackrock were left to absorb the blow almost alone, before another fortress fell. The Alpha northern frontier quickly began cracking under pressure. Dozens of lesser nobles begged Edward II for reinforcements, under the new Orc offensive. From there, the king disliked strengthening rival great nobles, but losing them would expose royal lands directly. He had to support the frontier without allowing any one family to gain too much. Court meetings became arguments over troops, territory, succession, and who would pay afterward. Prince Thompson favored stronger resistance and rapid reinforcement of threatened regions. Before the next Orc assault tested whether Stormwind's preparations had been enough, Prince Paul argued that preserving forces mattered more than bleeding the kingdom dry. Edward chose a compromise and shifted frontline legions toward the worst royal provinces. Meanwhile, Stormwind heard almost none of this directly. Clay only knew mixed Orc forces had finally appeared beyond the Cane River. The first 2 battalions attacked Stormwind and were smashed by hidden storm cannons. Clay refused to pursue because the real campaign had barely started. Every soldier on the wall kept asking the same question without saying it aloud. When was Levi coming back? Under relentless pressure and before anyone could react, 3 months into Panda's breakthrough, the bear's Saint Realm aura finally began to rise. Meanwhile, the fluctuation was impossible to hide from high-level demons roaming the 6th layer. Count Salin detected life inside the misty swamp and came searching, as the kingdom lost ground. He got close enough for Levi's malice detection to catch him. Levi and Angeles rushed toward the presence before Salin could retreat completely, while the Orc invasion tore through the northern frontier without waiting for Levi. This time Levi refused to let the demon escape. 5 times speed and wind magic erased the distance almost instantly, while the northern defenses collapsed. Levi decapitated Salin and shattered the demon core before the Count could recover. That old threat from the Shadow Temple battle finally ended in a muddy hell swamp. Then Panda's breakthrough detonated across the region. The bear entered the 9th tier Saint Realm and immediately became visible to stronger rulers. 3 9th tier demon auras descended toward the swamp within moments, under the new Orc offensive. Panda survived the breakthrough, but the bear did not celebrate, while Nelson's emergency decisions kept the territory alive by abandoning exposed positions. It grabbed Levi and Angelus and activated Nelson's spatial rune immediately. A portal opened toward Noah as the demons reached the place they had occupied. Soon the 3 escaped with seconds to spare. Behind them, the Duke of Bloodlake's allies could only curse the empty swamp. Ahead, the portal carried Levi toward a territory already fighting another war, before Stormwind's next siege. The spatial passage reopened above Noah with enough force to scatter everyone waiting nearby. Panda emerged first, now carrying the unmistakable pressure of a 9th tier Saint Realm beast. Levi and Angelus followed after months spent beneath pale suns and dead skies. For Levi, Stormwind smelled better than any palace could have smelled. The return also solved several mysteries surrounding Nelson's behavior, while the Orc invasion tore through the northern frontier without waiting for Levi. Later, the priest had given Panda the spatial rune because he expected this exact possibility. Angelus immediately suspected Nelson had manipulated the entire escape route from the beginning. Levi decided arguing with a 9th tier priest about foresight could wait. There was a war outside his walls right now, as the kingdom lost ground. Clay's face changed when he saw Levi standing alive in Stormwind again. The soldiers who had fought without their lord finally had the symbol they trusted back. Levi asked for battlefield reports before accepting celebration or rest, before Stormwind's next siege. Afterward, the news was worse than anything he expected, before the returning lord could even recover from months beneath Hell's pale suns. Orc forces had entered Alpha territory early, and in numbers far beyond a normal raid. Frostmoon Province had already lost Maka Fortress and Puss Fortress. Earl Fremont's defenses were shattered, and Frostmoon City itself faced enormous pressure. Another Orc force had already moved toward Viscount Leon and Grey Fortress, as Stormwind awaited Levi. What happened to the kingdom's supposedly independent defensive network? Nobody in Stormwind knew because the destroyed fortresses had sent almost no useful information. Then Levi asked about North Castle and prepared himself for another expensive answer. Mia explained that Nelson had ordered the castle abandoned before the main assault arrived. The priest believed Stormwind lacked enough troops to defend two major positions simultaneously. Jenkins destroyed exposed factories, kilns, saltworks, and equipment rather than leave them intact. Elsewhere, the pig-headed laborers and ships withdrew toward the mining island. That destruction hurt Levi, because every workshop represented money and time, before the returning lord could even recover from months beneath Hell's pale suns. Still, losing factories was cheaper than teaching enemy engineers how Stormwind worked. Nelson had even placed a formation inside abandoned North Castle, while the frontier burned. Several orc squads entered to investigate and never came back out. After that, enemy scouts stopped treating the empty fortress like an easy prize. Stormwind itself had survived multiple attacks using its remaining heavy weapons. Klein had also sent a 6th-tier magical giant crossbow as part of Levi's Misty Valley reward. The gift included 15 6th-tier explosive bolts, an absurdly generous military package, before the escape from Hell. Levi suspected there was more behind the reward than paperwork admitted, as Angelus and Levi emerged from Hell into a kingdom already fighting for survival. Then Nelson and Angelus entered the command room to announce they were leaving. Levi wanted Nelson to stay until the orc invasion ended. A 9th-tier priest living behind the walls felt like the best defensive formation imaginable. Nelson refused because open intervention would attract 9th-tier orc retaliation, while the northern defenses collapsed. Panda faced the same restriction despite now being Stormwind's strongest resident. Once Saints fought openly, 7th and 8th tier forces would gather around them. Stormwind would become the battlefield instead of the protected settlement, before the next orc assault tested whether Stormwind's preparations had been enough. Angelus could remain because her 7th tier strength stayed below that dangerous threshold as Stormwind awaited Levi. She refused too because the Tulip family was already boiling during her absence. Before leaving, Angelus noticed the strange construction of Levi's catapults. Her interest landed exactly where Levi did not want it. He claimed the enchanting was crude and changed the subject, as the kingdom lost ground. Nelson almost laughed because the lie was insultingly weak, while Nelson's emergency decisions kept the territory alive by abandoning exposed positions. Angelus offered to buy the technology rather than steal it. Levi postponed negotiations until after the Orc War, when everyone would understand its real value. That made Angelus immediately see his commercial plan, while the northern defenses collapsed. She suggested cooperation because she could price military technology better than Levi could. Then she left materials for 3 Guardian of the Four Kings formations as payment for rescue. Levi watched the gift and wondered why she was more generous now than during bargaining in Hell. Nelson and Angelus departed eastward while the frontier war continued burning. Levi returned to the command room and demanded exact enemy numbers. 5 large orc battalions now threatened Stormwind directly, before Levi returned to discover how much Stormwind had already sacrificed without him. 3 6th-tier leaders commanded crocodile men, sphinxes, wolf-headed cavalry, and pig-headed troops before the escape from Hell. 6 5th-tier professionals reinforced them, while eagle men watched constantly from above. Stormwind faced roughly 5,000 enemies with limited magical ammunition. Levi judged the force dangerous but manageable without exposing Panda during the kingdom-wide crisis. Then he walked the entire castle so every civilian could see that he had returned. Morale rose faster than any proclamation could have achieved, while Panda's 9th-tier breakthrough became the only reliable ticket out of Hell. That night Levi finally slept in his own room again. Before resting, he spent energy essence on super precognition, while the frontier burned. The talent rose to silver level and gained a special effect called clarity. His senses could now enter an evolved state during combat. Sight, hearing, smell, touch, and instinct sharpened until tiny movements became readable intentions. Levi compared it privately to observation haki from the stories of his old world. That comparison was ridiculous, but the battlefield value was not. He could now read attacks before bodies fully committed to them, as Stormwind's young army fought behind defenses built specifically for this nightmare. Eventually, the following night, Levi installed 1 Guardian of the Four Kings formation around Stormwind's key weapons. He lacked enough crystals to cover everything, so protection focused on artillery and magical crossbows. Additional invisibility arrays concealed a 5th-tier giant crossbow on the wall during the desperate counterattack. Levi expected the orcs to launch a decisive assault soon. They had spent several days probing and could not support a long siege indefinitely. At mid-morning, the enemy formation finally moved in full strength. 5 pig-headed squadrons advanced first as expendable pressure against Stormwind's ammunition, behind the Four Kings barrier. 2 snake-bodied heavy infantry units followed close behind, as Hell Apostle transformed the defenders' fear into panic spreading through the attackers. Their scaled bodies and climbing ability made them terrifying siege troops. Behind them came the 6th-tier dire crocodile Lamasi with more crocodile men. Malt, a 6th-tier wolf-headed warrior, held additional sphinx and pig-headed reserves, under constant siege pressure. 3 wolf-headed cavalry squadrons waited on the flanks for pursuit or breakthrough. Above everything, eagle men carried stones and captured magical crossbows through the sky, as the Four Kings formation kept the territory's expensive weapons alive under pressure. The formation was designed to kill Stormwind's heavy weapons before the real assault arrived. Levi saw the structure and gave the first firing order, during the desperate counterattack. Storm cannons launched 20-pound stones into the pig-headed vanguard. Bodies broke apart before the survivors even reached the ditch line. Next, the snake-bodied infantry accelerated immediately, trying to outrun the artillery pattern, while thousands of orcs attacked. A second volley used heavier stones and killed fewer targets because the climbers were too fast. Storm Ballistade took over and punched through more of the advancing heavy infantry. By the time they reached the wall, almost 1/5 of them were already gone. Then the eaglemen attacked from above while pig-headed slingers fired upward from below. The Four Kings formation activated exactly when both directions struck, before the retreating orcs escaped far enough to reorganize for another assault. Magic light swallowed stones, bolts, and climbing bodies before they reached the protected weapons. By then, the first snake-bodied soldiers hit the barrier and fell back into the crowd. Stormwind answered with concentrated crossbow fire while they were exposed. More than 60 of the climbers died in the next exchange. Lamasi stared at the suddenly protected artillery and abandoned the original plan before the retreat began. Levi answered their hesitation by ordering an immediate all-out assault. Crocodile men, sphinxes, and pig-headed troops surged toward the south wall together, as Hell Apostle transformed the defenders' fear into panic spreading through the attackers. For one long moment, every careful probe disappeared beneath pure numbers. Levi handed wall command to Clay and Parker before moving toward the professional fight. Will received orders to use the 6th-tier crossbow to delay one enemy leader. Other heavy crossbows concentrated on 4th and 5th-tier officers in the climbing mass. Levi used his enchanted bow to kill a 5th-tier pig-headed fighter weakened by an explosive bolt. That successful shot immediately pulled Malt's attention toward Levi, before the orcs broke formation. The wolf-headed commander hurled a spear at Levi from roughly 100 meters away. Clarity showed Levi the path before the weapon fully left Malt's hand. One small sidestep made the attack miss cleanly, before the orcs broke formation. Malt froze because Levi had not even been looking directly at him, before the retreating orcs escaped far enough to reorganize for another assault. Levi answered by killing the 3rd-tier dire wolf beneath Malt with a piercing arrow. The deliberate insult worked exactly as Levi had intended. Malt and Lamasi both rushed the wall from different angles. Malt reached the top first and met Levi's sword instead of an exposed archer. Clarity turned every shoulder movement and hip shift into a warning, as the artillery kept firing. Levi cut the 6th-tier wolf-headed man down from the wall. Lamasi arrived under cover of the distraction and was hit by explosive magical fire. Around then, the crocodile survived the blast, but the attack broke the rhythm of the assault. Then Levi finally released the spell he had been hiding, before the retreating orcs escaped far enough to reorganize for another assault. At Levi's command, the Hell Apostle opened directly behind him. Undead warriors began appearing on the battlefield from a place no ordinary soldier could see. The first wave struck the climbing orcs while Stormwind's defenders were still staring. Every enemy Levi personally killed could now return as something 1 tier weaker. From there, the dead started changing sides during the battle that created them, while thousands of orcs attacked. What army prepares for casualties that immediately become reinforcements for the enemy? Panic spread through the lower tier orcs faster than commands could stop it. Levi kept killing professionals and feeding the Hell Apostle with better bodies. Undead numbers grew until the south wall seemed defended by soldiers who should have been corpses. Malt's death broke one side of the command structure, before Levi's newest talent converted one captured enemy into a weapon against another. Lamasi saw the undead expanding and began questioning whether Stormwind even had a limit. The surviving 6th-tier Sphinx reached the same conclusion first, with Stormwind's survival at stake. Retreat orders spread through the army before Stormwind's ammunition was even close to exhausted. Wolf-headed cavalry that should have protected the withdrawal fled from the undead instead. Levi sent Clay's knights and regular cavalry out through the gate to pursue. He personally drove the undead westward after fleeing professional targets. Each kill meant military merit, stronger undead, or both, while thousands of orcs attacked. During the chase, Levi captured a 4th-tier dire crocodile and secretly enslaved him. Meanwhile, the agent was released back into the retreating force for future use. 2 kilometers from Stormwind, the remaining orcs finally reformed enough to stop the pursuit. Nearly 2 battalions gathered around the surviving high-tier fighters and cavalry. While thousands of orcs discovered Stormwind was no longer the weak barony they remembered, Levi had only several hundred undead left near him, many of them weak cannon fodder. He stopped instead of turning victory into stupidity. The orcs withdrew with a new fear attached to Stormwind's name, with Stormwind's survival at stake. Behind the walls, the cost waited for Levi again. Stormwind's casualties were heavy enough to make celebration feel dishonest. Soon, the territory had won, but too many families would receive pension payments afterward. Those deaths became wages Levi would pay for decades, as the Four Kings formation kept the territory's expensive weapons alive under pressure. He promoted 5 auxiliary companies into regular infantry because they had survived the real thing. Battle merits from the defense reached into 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th classes. Then Levi used essence from killing Malt to improve the domination contract, before Malt reached the walls. Silver contract increased capacity and created a special effect called soul descent. Levi could project part of his soul into an enslaved servant and control that body directly. The borrowed body could unleash roughly half of Levi's knight strength. When the possession ended, the host would be destroyed before the orcs broke formation. That was not a battlefield tool for heroes, as Hell Apostle transformed the defenders' fear into panic spreading through the attackers. It was an assassination weapon built from people Levi already considered disposable. And the orc war was about to give him targets worth testing it on. Stormwind did not return to normal after the city defense victory before the retreat began. It was still late spring, and the orc war had months left to run. Levi refused to send civilians back into exposed farmland while enemy scouts remained nearby. That meant next year's food supply was already becoming another battlefield. The territory needed grain, labor, and enough reserves to survive another bad harvest. Eaglemen began circling Stormwind again after several quiet days. Their constant surveillance made Levi hate the lack of air power more than ever. He wanted griffins, flying magical beasts, or anything that could clear his own sky. Until then, Panda became his best method for intelligence beyond the walls, as freed serfs discovered the strange dark army was actually fighting for humans. Later the 9th tier bear carried Levi north toward Grey Fortress under cover of distance and darkness. Levi first observed the northern battlefield without revealing himself, as the orc armies regroup. 3 orc legions pressed Grey Fortress day after day. Their commanders included 8th tier professionals, and a 7th tier dragon-blooded kobold priest. Grey Fortress held using a 6th tier war barrier and dense magical weapon positions. Siege ladders covered the walls while Eaglemen attacked from the air, while Grey Fortress remained threatened. Professionals repeatedly reached the battlements and were thrown back at terrible cost, before Divine Eye could repeat the sabotage that had already destroyed 2 fortresses. Levi found only 1 8th tier Sky Knight and 1 7th tier mage defending among the visible leaders. That imbalance made the fortress look one mistake away from disaster. What happened if the orcs attacked from south and north together? Levi circled behind the fortress and found half an orc legion stationed on the southern side. The force existed mainly to stop refugees and defeated nobles from reaching Grey Fortress. That still forced the defenders to split manpower away from the main siege. Levi followed the trail farther south and discovered how badly the surrounding baronies had collapsed. Viscount Leon's city still held, but nearby baronial castles had already fallen. Afterward, the orcs were carrying away people, grain, livestock, and whatever else could move. Levi looked at abandoned territory and saw 2 things simultaneously during the counteroffensive. Those settlements represented human misery and an enormous amount of ownerless wartime resources. He began striking scattered orc detachments using Hell Apostle and Panda's mobility. The undead army hit from directions the raiders never expected, as Levi's raids converted enemy occupation into grain, manpower, and breathing room. Every dead orc could become another soldier before the next camp even understood what happened. Levi eventually accumulated roughly 3,000 undead, his current summoning ceiling, while refugees flooded south. He used that force to clear multiple occupied baronies south of Grey Fortress. More than 6,000 tons of grain were recovered from captured storage. Nearly 20,000 serfs were freed from orc control during the same campaign. Elsewhere, the grain could feed 20,000 people for about a year. The rescued people meant Levi would still need to feed almost exactly that many mouths. Victory had turned a military hall into another budget line immediately, during Levi's rear area raids. Levi hid the refugees and supplies inside the Grey Mountains for safety, while Grey Fortress struggled against enemies attacking from outside and from within. He also found useful military inheritance inside the destroyed Hick family territory. A 5th tier Mad Lion breathing technique survived after the Hick family itself did not. A matching 5th tier sword skill and more than 5,000 gold coins came with it. Only around 60 soldiers from the Hick territory remained organized. Jerem, a 2nd tier warrior, became the most useful surviving officer among them, while refugees flooded south. Levi contracted the surviving professionals and ordered Jerem to guard the rescued people. Those troops no longer had a lord to return to. Stormwind had just inherited another piece of a dead barony, while Grey Fortress struggled against enemies attacking from outside and from within. The Orc command finally noticed an undead army destroying their rear area harvest. Rumors spread about a hidden dark mage operating south of Grey Fortress before the invasion ended. Eventually, the surviving Orc officers began gathering scattered units instead of feeding them to Levi separately. That reaction reduced easy targets but relieved pressure on the trapped human population. Then Levi heard something that made the entire invasion look different. Senior Orcs mentioned a deal between Behemoth King Achilles and humans inside Alpha. One offhand reference pointed toward Maka Fortress and whatever had happened there as Levi raided occupied baronies. The fall of multiple major fortresses suddenly felt less like battlefield collapse, while Grey Fortress struggled against enemies attacking from outside and from within. Levi needed someone inside Grey Fortress who could tell him what the army actually knew. He pushed one more major strike before approaching the fortress. 3,000 undead attacked the half-legion stationed south of Grey Fortress before dawn. A 7th-tier leopard-headed commander led the enemy camp. 5 times strength was no longer enough for Levi to treat that opponent casually. So Levi activated the new blood-burning effect from ultimate power before the invasion ended. His body surged beyond its normal limit while the undead pinned enemy formations in place. Levi killed the 7th-tier commander with one brutal close-range strike. Then he cut down a 6th-tier jackal and another 6th-tier leopard-headed fighter during the collapse. 3 senior deaths destroyed the remaining command structure almost immediately, while battlefield rumors slowly exposed a conspiracy larger than any single fortress. The Orc camp broke and fled while undead chased until evening. Levi discovered Hell Apostle could summon no more than about 3,000 undead at once. Instead of adding bodies, he began replacing weak soldiers with stronger professional corpses. Next, the army became smaller in quality gaps even while the headcount stayed fixed. When Northeast Legion cavalry finally approached, they saw a field controlled by undead. Their first response to Levi was suspicion rather than gratitude, under Grey Fortress's battered walls. Weapons came up because nobody knew whether Levi was a registered dark mage or a new disaster. Rock recognized him before the situation turned violent. The cavalry commander beside Rock introduced himself as Abner, a 7th-tier Earth Knight. Levi dismissed the undead back to hell and explained that Nelson knew about his dark magic. That calmed the soldiers enough for official verification. Klein arrived later and embraced Levi like a man who had expected a ghost. By then, the friendship survived even after Levi returned from actual hell, as Levi's raids converted enemy occupation into grain, manpower, and breathing room. Grey Fortress's officers then invited him inside to explain what had happened south of the walls. The fortress command structure had changed dramatically during the war, while refugees flooded south. Reinforcements from the Northeast Legion now occupied positions once held by Klein's smaller battalion command. Deputy Legion Commander Stark was an 8th-tier Sky Knight overseeing the crisis. Several 7th-tier commanders and Martins, a 7th-tier Archmage, supported him under Grey Fortress's battered walls. They thanked Levi because destroying the Southern Orc force removed a possible pincer attack. Then Viscount Leon arrived personally with information from the retreating Orcs. He confirmed the Southern armies had been preparing to reunite and threaten Grey Fortress. Levi's interference had broken that timing and protected both Leon City and the fortress. Viscount Leon gave formal thanks on behalf of his family, as Levi turned abandoned baronies into food, soldiers, and intelligence for Stormwind. He promised Stormwind future friendship and access to Leon resources Grey Fortress could not provide. For Levi, that was worth more than polite applause. A powerful neighboring noble had just become an ally because Levi attacked at the right time. Before leaving, Viscount Leon invited Levi to Leon City after the crisis, while refugees flooded south. Levi declined for now, because something inside Grey Fortress bothered him more. He had sensed Puss, the 4th-tier divine eye mage he controlled, somewhere inside the fortress. The old spy should not have been here during a major siege without a reason. Levi left a coded message and waited. While he waited, he used the latest energy essence to improve absolute defense. That completed silver upgrades for all 5 of his existing innate talents, as freed serfs discovered the strange dark army was actually fighting for humans. Transparency sharpened perception, infinity enhanced movement, and black armor doubled defensive output during the counteroffensive. Soul Descent weaponized controlled bodies while blood burning pushed physical power beyond normal limits. Levi's panel now looked less like one profession and more like several unfair advantages stacked together. Still, 7th-tier combat possessed a qualitative difference he could not ignore. Around then, the attack on the leopard-headed commander proved surprise mattered as much as raw numbers. 5 days after the coded message, Puss finally answered. The Divine Eye Society had infiltrated Grey Fortress with a 7th-tier Archmage leading 6 mages. Their mission inside Grey Fortress went far beyond ordinary espionage, as the Orc armies regrouped. They intended to strike the Legion Mage squad during the Orc assault, while Levi used stolen enemies and abandoned resources to stabilize the collapsing frontier. Then they would destroy the defensive formation core and military communication array. That mission matched the unexplained patterns surrounding Maka Fortress and Puss Fortress almost perfectly. Levi went to Klein that evening and asked how those fortresses had actually fallen. Klein's answer made the original rumors sound almost harmless as the Orc armies regrouped. Not one defender from either fortress had escaped alive. Main battalions, reserve battalions, and entire mage squads vanished without sending useful messages. From there, the Northeast Legion had lost most of its original strength across those disasters. Only Grey Fortress, Frostmoon City units, and scattered mage squads remained operational. What enemy kills every witness and silences military communications at the same time? By that point, Levi no longer needed any additional evidence, while battlefield rumors slowly exposed a conspiracy larger than any single fortress. The Divine Eye group inside Grey Fortress had to disappear before the next Orc assault. Meanwhile, the following day, Levi and Panda moved near the Western Slave Market, under Grey Fortress's battered walls. The infiltrators were disguised as poor commoners making bamboo baskets inside a small courtyard. Puss prepared food for them while waiting for Levi's signal. Then Levi activated Soul Descent and entered the captive remotely. His consciousness entered Puss's body and took control of the mage from inside. The borrowed body could survive only one serious burst of Levi's night power. That limitation was enough because the target sat less than arm's length away. Levi carried food toward the 7th-tier Archmage and waited until the man noticed something wrong. Then blood burning ignited through Puss's fragile body, while Grey Fortress struggled against enemies attacking from outside and from within. One punch launched the 7th-tier mage across the courtyard and badly injured him. Soon, the strike failed to kill because 7th-tier mages possessed a natural defensive magic field. Puss's body began collapsing immediately after delivering the attack, during the northern collapse. Levi withdrew his soul while the wounded Archmage fled toward the western wall. When the target arrived, Panda was already waiting nearby. The mage managed only part of a Saint Realm warning before one bear paw ended him. Levi entered the courtyard in his real body during the chaos, during Levi's rear area raids. He teleported behind a 5th-tier mage, subdued him, and forced a domination contract. Panda eliminated the remaining infiltrators before they could scatter. Later, the entire Divine Eye cell disappeared within moments of launching the plan they expected to use later. Then a military message arrived from another province. While Grey Fortress struggled against enemies attacking from outside and from within, Friesland had fallen into chaos after Divine Eye sabotage. 2 major fortresses were lost, Friesland City was breached, and the Northern Legion suffered catastrophic casualties. The message ordered every fortress to inspect itself for infiltrators immediately, before the hidden cell escape. Martin stared at the report while Levi was already cleaning up Grey Fortress's own problem. For one long moment, coincidence stopped being believable. Afterward, the Divine Eye Society was helping the Orc invasion from inside Alpha territory, and someone powerful enough to coordinate that sabotage was still hidden above them. The warning from Friesland reached Grey Fortress while the war outside was still raging. Martins immediately dispatched Abner toward the Western Slave Market to inspect suspicious activity. By then, Levi had already removed the exact cell the message warned about. He sent the enslaved 5th-tier mage away through the western wall before military investigators arrived. That captive was too useful to kill and too dangerous to keep inside the fortress. Instead of celebrating, Levi searched every fallen infiltrator for intelligence. Every storage ring contained the kind of resources hidden organizations accumulate quietly, as Levi turned abandoned baronies into food, soldiers, and intelligence for Stormwind. Elsewhere, the 7th-tier Archmage even carried a restoration magic ring capable of recovering mana. Those spoils were valuable, but the information behind them mattered more, as the Orc armies regrouped. If Divine Eye had opened Maka, Puss and Friesland from inside, the Orc War had another author. The battlefield everyone blamed on hunger now carried signs of deliberate political sabotage. Grey Fortress tightened internal security immediately after the message. Orc attacks continued, but the strategic picture finally started shifting by late August. News arrived that Redman had defeated the 9th-tier dragon-blooded kobold Daniel near Frostmoon City. That victory broke the momentum of the main Orc offensive in the province. Other fronts also began reporting weaker attacks and gradual withdrawals. The Orcs had gathered enormous plunder and no longer wanted a costly extended war. Eventually, the royal family lacked enough fresh forces to pursue aggressively after suffering catastrophic losses. So the kingdom watched enemies march north carrying stolen people, food, and wealth. Victory tasted thin when the road home was full of captives, before the hidden cell escaped. As the armies around Grey Fortress withdrew, Levi hurried back toward Stormwind, before the kingdom finally learned why 2 northern fortresses had fallen so quickly. He wanted to prevent one final revenge attack before the orcs crossed the mountains. Klein agreed to watch the rescued grain and refugees hidden inside the Grey Mountains. On the road, Levi confirmed the Cane River enemy forces were also preparing to retreat. That lowered the immediate danger but created a short window for one more operation. Levi contacted the enslaved orc agents he had planted earlier. They were ordered to remain near Pig-Headed Valley after the main armies moved north. Then Levi found the 5th-tier Divine Eye mage captured from Grey Fortress, before Divine Eye struck again. The man's lightning affinity gave Levi something his chaos meditation technique still lacked. Levi extracted a 5th-tier lightning meditation technique and matching spells from the captive. Keeping the mage afterward offered little benefit and substantial risk. Royal hunters would soon tear through the north looking for Divine Eye survivors. So Levi sent buyers into the Grey Mountains with a different mission. Next, the mage would gather scattered refugees and direct them toward the Cane River. Stormwind needed people almost as much as it needed magical resources, as liquor, sugar, and artillery gave Stormwind 3 completely different sources of leverage. More than 10 days later, the main orc armies had moved deep into the Savage Mountains. The units left behind were generally battered forces unable to keep pace with the main retreat. One of those commanders was Lamasi, the 6th-tier dire crocodile who had attacked Stormwind. Levi had already enslaved a lower-tier crocodile inside Lamasi's force, as Storm Cannon changed everything. That made the retreating commander a perfect target for soul descent. Levi sacrificed the controlled body, entered it, and coordinated with New Air and another 5th-tier fighter. Lamasi never expected a subordinate to become Levi from the inside. By then, the ambush killed the 6th-tier crocodile before his remaining unit could intervene, as Storm Cannon changed everything. That death settled one debt from the Stormwind siege and added more high-level essence. Then another problem appeared much closer to home, while a simple cannon demonstration changed how Viscount Leon and Redman valued Stormwind. Baron Otto's people had begun robbing grain and supplies moving through the region. The timing could not have been worse for Stormwind's refugee and food operations. Otto belonged to the Dalton faction, which made the conflict politically inconvenient. Levi did not care because stolen grain still looked like stolen grain, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. He assembled storm cannons and marched toward Otto's castle. Viscount Leon learned of the dispute and moved to observe before it escalated into noble warfare. A 7th-tier Dawn priest accompanied him because Levi's necromancy worried everyone now. Baron Otto expected walls to protect him from an ordinary frontier baron, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. His advisors dismissed Levi's catapults because the machines did not look enchanted, while Stormwind negotiated from strength. Then 5 giant stones flew toward the castle. Each projectile weighed roughly 100 kilograms and landed with terrifying accuracy. The walls cracked before Otto's defenders understood the range involved. During the cannon demonstration, storm cannons kept firing until the gate and sections of stonework began collapsing. Levi prepared the infantry to advance through the breach, as liquor, sugar, and artillery gave Stormwind 3 completely different sources of leverage. Before the charge started, white flags appeared above the damaged walls. Before Levi could demand terms, Baron Otto simply surrendered, under Levi's growing influence. Clay stared at the castle because Stormwind had barely started fighting. For one long moment, Levi almost looked disappointed by the efficiency of his own artillery. He stopped the bombardment because surrender changed the legal situation immediately. Viscount Leon watched from the air and focused less on Otto than the machines below. An unmagical catapult had just thrown massive stones 300 meters with battlefield accuracy. Around then, the military value was obvious even before anyone discussed cost, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. The Dawn priest left once he confirmed Levi had not used necromancy against the Baron. Leon remained because the political and military consequences were suddenly much larger, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. Otto's robbery case moved toward compensation rather than annihilation. Levi demanded repayment in food, people, and resources instead of a pointless corpse count. A few weeks later, the promised compensation finally reached Grey Fortress. Stormwind received grain and serfs at exactly the moment both were most valuable. From there, the recovered population solved part of Levi's labor shortage for rebuilding and future expansion. The food offset the damage created by abandoning farmland during the Orc War. Baron Otto had expected easy loot from an isolated frontier lord, before the nobles learned the design. He ended up financing the territory he tried to rob, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Meanwhile, reports of storm cannons traveled faster than Levi preferred. Viscount Leon had seen enough to understand what the machines could do on frontier fortifications. Angeles heard about the conflict and reached an obvious conclusion from far away. Levi's weapon technology was now exposed, so selling slowly would only invite imitation. She believed the royal family should become the central buyer and distributor during Redman's royal visit. High nobles buying separately would unite to drive Levi's price downward. A royal purchase could convert political protection into part of the deal itself. Levi had already reached the same conclusion by the time the royal delegation appeared. Meanwhile, the man leading it was Paladin Redman. Stormwind soldiers straightened the moment the 9th-tier royal expert entered the territory, as liquor, sugar, and artillery gave Stormwind 3 completely different sources of leverage. Redman had recently defeated Daniel and carried enormous prestige from the Orc War. Levi greeted him formally, but Redman skipped ceremony and asked to see the storm cannons. The request told Levi the real negotiation had already begun, under the new royal agreement. On the southern wall, Stormwind demonstrated large and giant cannons with different stone weights. Projectiles crossed the field and struck designated targets without magical propulsion. Redman watched carefully because the simplicity made the weapon more attractive, not less. A magical giant crossbow demanded expensive enchanted construction and specialized ammunition. A storm cannon demanded timber, stone, calculations, trained crews, and patience as trade replaced battlefield pressure. What happened when every northern fortress could afford dozens of them? The orcs would begin paying for every siege with far more bodies. Redman approved the weapon's performance before asking what Levi wanted, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Back at the Baron's mansion, Panda woke during the royal visit, as storm cannon changed everything. Soon, the bear immediately sensed Redman's Saint Realm pressure and watched him like a rival predator. Redman recognized Panda's 9th-tier breakthrough just as quickly. He connected the bear's return from hell to Nelson's spatial rune without much effort. The conversation reminded everyone that Stormwind now housed a Saint Realm ally permanently. That fact quietly changed the bargaining table before money was ever mentioned. Redman promised he had not come to force a sale. During the cannon demonstration, Levi asked whether the royal family wanted the technology only for itself or for every major noble house. Later, the question amused Redman because its political purpose was obvious. Before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Levi wanted the crown to become Stormwind's shield against collective pressure from other nobles. Redman accepted the role, excluding only the Tulip family from the royal purchase package. Angeles could negotiate her own access later. Then Levi finally named the price Stormwind wanted in return. He requested multiple 4th-tier magical artifacts across several useful elements, before the nobles learned the design. He asked for night training potions, meditation methods, concealment formations, and city protection arrays. Magic crystals, warcraft horses, and heavy magical crossbows appeared on the list as well. The demands sounded enormous until Redman examined their actual levels. Almost everything stayed at 5th tier or below, as Levi turned the kingdom's sudden interest into political protection for his young territory. Levi was asking for breadth, infrastructure, and production capacity rather than one legendary treasure. That restraint told Redman exactly what kind of territory Stormwind intended to become. Afterward, the royal family rejected several parts because its own wartime reserves were depleted. Life element resources were unavailable, and night potions were needed to rebuild the damaged army. The requested warcraft horses were reduced, and the highest crossbow demand was adjusted. Levi countered by adding lightning equipment and potion recipes for Stormwind's internal use. Elsewhere, the bargaining continued until both sides could explain the deal without losing face. Then Redman and Levi signed a royal seal agreement, before the nobles learned the design. Storm cannon technology officially became something the crown would carry to other great families. For Levi, the transaction converted one simple machine into a basket of strategic resources. For the royal family, it bought a weapon every fortress could reproduce cheaply. What looked like lumber and rope had become diplomatic leverage. Then Levi took Redman north to the construction base inside North Castle. The Saint Realm warrior studied the fortress itself before even reaching the workshop. Its wall geometry and layered design reflected years of military logic Levi remembered from Earth. Redman asked whether Levi had designed the castle personally, before the capital received the report. Levi calmly admitted that he had already prepared those plans, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Redman immediately asked to include those fortress plans in the deal. This time Levi offered them for free because he wanted goodwill more than another negotiation. That generosity improved Redman's mood right until they entered the storm cannon workshop. Workers were building the kingdom-changing weapon with an almost insulting amount of simplicity. Redman stared at wood, ropes, counterweights, and ordinary structural pieces. His expression asked whether he had just purchased a glorified catapult, as Levi priced his technology. Levi calmly explained that the machine's secret was not exotic material. The value came from tested proportions, throwing angles, load calculations, and crew procedures. Dozens of failed designs had been compressed into something simple enough to mass produce. Redman still looked unconvinced, so Levi offered a practical test. Before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. A newly built cannon was assembled and calibrated using Stormwind's operating data, while Stormwind negotiated from strength. Without that data, crews struggled to achieve the same reliable accuracy. That successful demonstration softened Redman's remaining suspicion toward the cannon. Simple construction no longer meant simple battlefield employment, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. Redman mentally reassigned his irritation toward royal mages who had never optimized existing catapults properly. Levi wisely did not argue with that conclusion, as Stormwind traded wartime innovation for resources it could never easily produce alone. Eventually, the royal party ignored storm ballista technology because Alpha already mass-produced magical giant crossbows. Storm cannons were different because they filled a cheap artillery role magic weapons could not scale into. The delegation returned to Stormwind for a banquet after the demonstrations. That should have ended the business portion of the visit. Levi had another product waiting on the table, as Levi priced his technology. Redman took one drink of Stormwind's strongest distilled liquor and immediately started coughing. Next, the alcohol hit much harder than ordinary northern wine. Levi watched the reaction with the satisfaction of a salesman recognizing an open market. Storm cannon technology had brought the royal family into his dining hall, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Now storm spirits could keep them buying long after the war ended, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. Levi explained the liquor's strength, production, and commercial potential without giving away every detail. Brown sugar joined the discussion because the same agricultural expansion supported both products. The royal delegation tasted a frontier economy built around more than war spoils. By the end of the meal, Levi signed trade agreements covering liquor and brown sugar too. That banquet quietly changed the financial future of Stormwind. Military technology would generate one massive exchange. Liquor and sugar could generate revenue every season afterward, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. By then, the exiled pretty husband had arrived at this frontier with 500 gold coins and enemies everywhere. Now a royal saint had traveled personally to buy technology from him, before the royal family carried storm cannon technology into every threatened northern fortress. Grey Fortress officers owed him favors, Viscount Leon called Stormwind a friend, and Panda had reached the Saint Realm. Angelis had returned to Tulip City knowing her disposable husband could bargain with her as an equal. The Divine Eye Society had tried assassination, surveillance, infiltration, and national sabotage. The royal visit also confirmed something Levi had been building toward since his exile. Stormwind no longer depended on a single income stream or one lucky battlefield harvest. Sugar beets fed the distillery created liquor, and liquor attracted wealthy buyers. Artillery technology created political leverage while ordinary trade created recurring cash flow. Those two systems protected each other better than another castle wall could, as Levi priced his technology. Around then, the compensation from Otto's surrender also arrived at the perfect moment. New serfs replaced part of the labor Stormwind had lost during wartime disruption. Recovered grain reduced the immediate risk created by abandoned spring fields, as liquor, sugar, and artillery gave Stormwind three completely different sources of leverage. Levi could rebuild destroyed workshops without choosing between workers and food, before the capital received the report. That mattered because the next expansion plan required both at the same time. North Castle had survived as a military shell after Nelson's temporary protection vanished. Its workshops could now return to producing cannons, armor, and other war supplies. Stormwind City could remain the population center, while northern production restarted behind stronger walls. The long-term three-castle plan had taken damage, but it had not died. For Levi, rebuilding meant buying time before the next major invasion cycle. From there, the Orc War had exposed weaknesses no peaceful year could have revealed, before another buyer appeared. Stormwind needed air power, better formations, deeper food reserves, and more mid-tier professionals. Every item Levi demanded from Redman pointed directly at one of those weaknesses. The fourth-tier artifacts were meant to strengthen specific fighters, not decorate a treasury. Meanwhile, the meditation methods widened Levi's chaos path and gave future mages better ceilings. The city protection formation addressed the exact problem North Castle had suffered against magical beasts. Magic crystals kept formations and enchanted weapons functioning when markets became unreliable, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Warcraft horses strengthened mobility for cavalry that had repeatedly proved decisive in pursuit. The heavy crossbows replaced military assets Stormwind had spent surviving previous battles. Levi's shopping list looked greedy only if someone ignored the graves outside his walls. Hundreds of dead soldiers had already demonstrated what underfunded defenses actually cost. A missing crossbow could become 20 funerals during the next siege, under the new royal agreement. A missing formation could turn one wind blade into an entire row of casualties. Stormwind's technology was cheap because Levi wanted expensive resources in exchange for knowledge. That imbalance made sense only because knowledge could be sold without leaving Stormwind weaker. Once Redman understood that, the negotiation became easier to frame. The crown would receive designs it could reproduce across the kingdom, as liquor, sugar, and artillery gave Stormwind 3 completely different sources of leverage. Stormwind would receive resources too difficult for one frontier baron to collect alone. Other noble families would eventually pay through the royal arrangement instead of surrounding Levi directly. That political insulation was part of the price even though nobody wrote it on parchment. Redman understood the implication and never pretended otherwise, before the nobles learned the design. A 9th-tier royal representative lending legitimacy to the deal changed every later conversation. Any noble threatening Stormwind afterward would also be threatening a royal commercial arrangement. Levi had turned technology into a shield without building another tower. Soon, the Free Castle blueprints served the same purpose on a smaller scale. Redman saw generosity where Levi saw relationship management, as trade replaced battlefield pressure. Giving away one design could make future requests easier when Stormwind needed royal help. That was a trade Levi's old sales instincts understood perfectly, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. The cannon workshop still nearly ruined that carefully improved mood. Nothing about the construction looked worthy of a kingdom-level negotiation at first glance. There were no legendary metals, glowing runes, or secret magical crystals inside the frame. Carpenters shaped timber while workers prepared ropes, axles, buckets, and counterweight structures. Later, the final machine looked almost embarrassingly ordinary beside an enchanted giant crossbow, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. Redman therefore tested the process instead of trusting Levi's explanation. That test was where the real value finally became visible, before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. Changing projectile weight altered range, arc, timing, and the counterweight balance crews needed. Changing the lever ratio changed everything again before wind and terrain entered the calculation. Stormwind had already paid for those mistakes through repeated experiments, before another buyer appeared. The buyer was purchasing the corrected answers instead of repeating the failures. Redman could dislike the simplicity and still respect the accumulated data behind it. By the end of the demonstration, suspicion had turned into reluctant approval. Levi never needed Redman to admire the machine, as trade replaced battlefield pressure. He only needed the paladin to believe other fortresses would want it. As Stormwind traded wartime innovation for resources it could never easily produce alone. That belief was already obvious before they returned to the banquet. Then the liquor created a different kind of surprise. Frontier wine normally offered warmth, but storm spirits struck with concentrated heat during Redman's royal visit. Redman's reaction immediately told Levi the product could distinguish itself from common alcohol. Afterward, the same distillation knowledge that once looked like survival improvisation had become export potential. Brown sugar strengthened the package because it reached households the liquor trade could not. Together, both goods made Stormwind commercially relevant beyond military emergencies. That mattered if Levi wanted a territory that remained wealthy during peace, while Redman measured how much one baron's invention could change future defensive wars. War merit was powerful, but relying on war meant praying for someone to attack you. Levi preferred income that arrived because merchants wanted another shipment, as trade replaced battlefield pressure. The banquet therefore ended with more than hospitality between a baron and a royal saint. It ended with Stormwind entering a larger commercial network under royal attention. That attention was useful, but it also carried another obvious danger. Elsewhere, the more profitable Stormwind became, the harder secrecy would become to maintain, as storm cannon changed everything. The same nobles who once ignored the frontier would start asking how Levi built everything. Some would offer money, others alliances, and others knives hidden behind legal arguments. The Divine Eye Society had already shown what organized infiltration could accomplish inside fortresses. Eventually, the Shadow Temple had shown what happened when enemies operated across kingdoms and planes. Levi could no longer assume every threat would arrive carrying a banner, as liquor, sugar, and artillery gave Stormwind 3 completely different sources of leverage. That made Puss, buyers, Niz, and the enslaved orc agents more valuable as intelligence assets. Each one occupied a different layer of Levi's growing information network. Puss had exposed the Divine Eye operation before Grey Fortress collapsed. Buyers provided lightning knowledge before disappearing into refugee management work, before the capital received the report. Niz remained connected to the Shadow Temple while pretending Levi had never captured him. The orc slaves gave Levi eyes inside territories humans could not safely patrol. None of those tools looked heroic, and Levi never needed them to. Stormwind survived because its lord preferred useful information before beautiful principles, before Levi's enemies decided stealing the cannon design might be cheaper than purchasing it. Next, the same practicality shaped his relationship with Panda, under the new royal agreement. The bear was now a Saint Realm ally, yet Levi could not deploy it carelessly. Panda's strength protected Stormwind most effectively when enemies were unsure whether it would intervene. Openly crushing normal armies would only summon stronger opponents to the frontier. So the territory's greatest weapon often needed to sleep inside a courtyard. That restraint frustrated Levi, but Nelson's warning had been correct, while the kingdom watched Stormwind. Power strong enough to solve one battle could change the category of the entire war. Levi therefore needed his own strength to keep climbing beneath Panda's protective ceiling. The latest init upgrades showed how far that climb had already gone, while Redman measured how much one baron's invention could change future defensive wars. Clarity made ambushes harder, Infinity changed movement, and black armor multiplied survivability. Blood Burning offered explosive power while Soul Descent created frightening infiltration options. Before another buyer appeared, Hell Apostle turned enemy casualties into portable troops without long-term supply costs. None of those abilities alone made Levi untouchable. Together, they made predicting his real combat ceiling increasingly difficult for everyone else. Even Angeles had started watching him differently inside Hell, as Stormwind traded wartime innovation for resources it could never easily produce alone. Their marriage still began as political convenience, humiliation, and exile, before another buyer appeared. But Angeles had entered Hell after Levi instead of letting the passage close. Levi had then helped rescue her from demons and traded with her as an equal. Neither of them had solved what that relationship actually meant yet. That uncertainty was another reason Levi felt relieved when Angeles returned to Tulip City. Stormwind gave him enough problems without adding a 7th-tier wife to daily command meetings. Still, her offer to broker future technology sales remained strategically useful. Angeles understood high-noble politics better than Levi ever wanted to learn them. Redman understood the royal family, Klein understood the army, and Leon understood Frostmoon nobility. Levi's network was becoming more important than any single fortress improvement, while Stormwind negotiated from strength. By then, the boy exiled without allies now had relationships stretching from Storm Bay to Kanglan City. Some were friendships, some contracts, some bargains, and some enemies forced into service. Together, they formed the real wall around Stormwind's future. Before Stormwind's victories attracted enemies powerful enough to stop underestimating its lord. And unlike Stone, that wall could move with Levi wherever the next war began. What happened when Stormwind needed institutions stronger than Levi's personal attacks? Stormwind had survived by improvisation, but survival at kingdom scale required systems that could outlive every crisis. Levi had answered by stealing their spells, enslaving their mages, and uncovering their battlefield role. The Shadow Temple had opened hell around him and still failed to keep him there. The Gale Wolf King had attacked for Panda and ended as cultivation material for Stormwind. Around then, the Orc War had arrived to erase the territory and instead advertised Levi's weapons to the kingdom. Every threat so far had entered Stormwind as danger and left converted into resources. But that pattern was becoming visible now. Visibility brings buyers, allies, admirers, spies, and enemies strong enough to stop underestimating you. For one long moment, surviving the frontier was no longer Levi's hardest problem. The harder question was what happened when the entire kingdom finally priced his true value. Redman's convoy would leave carrying canon data, trade contracts, and a completely different opinion of Stormwind. Those papers would reach the capital before the next wave of rumors did. And once Edward II read them, Levi would no longer fit comfortably inside the title of ordinary baron. From there, the frontier had finished testing whether Levi could survive, before the capital received the report. Now the kingdom was about to decide how high he should rise. Stormwind had survived being ignored, and now royal attention was becoming far more dangerous than neglect. Redman departed with storm cannons, craftsmen, and soldiers, while Levi stayed behind counting what victory had actually bought. Royal payment would arrive within 3 months, but Stormwind could not wait 3 months to grow stronger. So Levi began with the people already standing inside his walls. More than 30 elite soldiers had reached their limits, alongside 8 apprentice knights ready for professional breakthroughs. What good was another trade agreement if Stormwind lacked enough professionals to survive the next invasion? Parker spread the promotion lists across the table while Levi converted battlefield survival into cultivation resources. Fate and potions went to soldiers who had earned the chance to gamble on becoming true warriors. Life essence went to apprentice knights whose names had already appeared beside too many casualty reports. Clay received the breakthrough resources needed to push toward a third-tier knight. John received something different: every captured enchanting note Levi could safely place in his hands. Obsessed with enchanted equipment now, the former potion specialist had no reason to expect Levi would stop him. 5 young fiery steeds had also matured into first-tier magical beasts under Wendy's care. Once the royal family's 50 magical beast horses arrived, Levi planned to reorganize his scattered knight squads. Clay, Roger, Eric and Thomas would become the core of a true magical beast cavalry squadron. Several more knight squads would begin training before Stormwind even possessed enough mounts for them. Levi was building riders before horses, officers before companies, and defenses before the next enemy appeared. That looked wasteful on paper. On the frontier, waiting for danger was usually more expensive. 2 new archer companies followed, commanded by Ron and Yuri, both soldiers who had risen from serfdom. 5 auxiliary companies became regular infantry companies, giving Stormwind a much deeper reserve of trained manpower. Levi also ordered ordinary warhorses purchased, because the last orc retreat had exposed one humiliating weakness. Stormwind could break an enemy formation, but it still lacked enough speed to harvest a fleeing army. Every survivor who escaped that battlefield had been future blood left uncollected. And on the northern frontier, mercy by exhaustion often returned wearing enemy armor. Yet soldiers were only half the problem waiting inside Levi's expanding territory. More than 10,000 new people had arrived, and winter was already closing around Storm Cape. Jenkins could organize villages, ration grain and move labor, but even he could not manufacture warm houses overnight. For 2 weeks, Levi rode across the peninsula with Jenkins choosing locations before the first heavy snow. Stored red bricks built more than a dozen villages for over 4,000 newcomers. Everyone else received temporary arrangements and strict orders to gather firewood before temperatures dropped further. A frozen family produced no taxes, no soldiers, and no future professionals. On Levi's ledger, winter deaths were grief measured in missing hands for spring planting. That was the frontier's ugliest arithmetic, and pretending otherwise would not keep anyone alive. Old Charlie's cultivation also accelerated after Levi supplied magic crystals and low-tier cultivation potions. Old Charlie, once the servant carrying a frightened exile toward Stormwind, was quietly becoming something more dangerous. Levi meanwhile finished studying new 4th Circle Earth spells, including gravity and other defensive techniques. Inside his spiritual sea, the Earth Magic Tower steadily absorbed every pattern he mastered. He wanted a defensive talent before the next assassin arrived close enough to touch him. But before that talent appeared, Wendy brought him news about something with wings. A thunder falcon had been spotted around the northeastern cliffs of Storm Cape. 4th-tier flying magical beasts were rare enough to change how an entire territory moved information and people. Levi immediately wanted one. Panda immediately wanted nothing to do with it. When Levi suggested Panda help capture the bird, the giant bear answered by sending him flying. Panda snapped that he was a 9th-tier sacred beast, not Levi's personal hunting mount. Wendy stared at Levi sprawled on the ground for several breaths and fought a smile. Levi stood, dusted himself off, and decided pride was cheaper than arguing with Panda again. If Panda refused, Levi would catch the Thunder Falcon himself. On the way toward the cliffs, Wendy admitted she and Mia had already taken Little Kun out alone. Little Kun had advanced to the 3rd tier using the Dragon Ball's power. Levi's irritation appeared instantly, because advancement could attract powerful magical beasts from far beyond Stormwind's reach. Wendy said she had avoided disturbing his cultivation, then lowered her head with practiced innocence. Levi's lecture collapsed almost immediately, though he warned her the next breakthrough required advance notice. He had already traded for a 4th-tier concealment array precisely to hide dangerous advancement auras. Mia waited near the cliffs with a telescope, tracking a pair of thunder falcons nesting high above the sea. Near the nest, the female remained alone while the male had recently flown out to hunt. Better still, Mia believed there were young falcons inside the cliffside crevice. What was more valuable than capturing one rare flying beast? Capturing a breeding pair meant Stormwind might someday stop buying every advantage from someone else. Levi climbed down toward the nest while the sea hammered white foam against the rocks below. A female thunder falcon spotted him first and folded its wings into a lightning-wreathed dive. Blue arcs cracked against Levi's black magical armor, bright enough to flash across the cliff face. He waited until the bird came dangerously close before releasing corpse poison spread. Trying to climb away, the falcon found Levi using no distance to appear directly beside it. One hand caught the struggling beast while corpse poison invaded its body faster than lightning could repel him. He enslaved it briefly with the Dominator contract, treated the poison, and learned what waited inside the nest. Then he bound the female with magical shackles and released the domination before bringing her down alive. Wendy's eyes changed the moment she saw the captured beast breathing instead of bleeding. Levi had brought her a weapon. Wendy was already looking at a creature she could tame. Later, the male falcon returned and turned the cliffs into another violent storm of claws and thunder. By the end, Stormwind possessed the pair and the young they had been protecting. A family of predators had become an investment with feathers. Then early winter brought something even rarer than magical beasts, royal griffin riders. They carried part of Edward II's promised payment and a message that changed Levi's political future. From Frostmoon City, the remaining 6th-tier magical crossbows and 50 magical beast horses would follow. But the royal envoy had come with another offer before those supplies even arrived. Edward II wanted to promote Levi from Baron to Viscount. Levi did not celebrate. Free generosity from a king usually arrived carrying invisible chains. He asked what the royal family actually wanted from him. Marcus Vito explained that the recent defeat had damaged military morale across the kingdom. Visible rewards were necessary for nobles whose performances could still be called victories. Levi's battlefield record qualified, especially after the storm cannon contribution was counted as military merit. 2 third-class merits could push him directly into the rank of Viscount. Yet the second reason mattered far more than morale. Grey Fortress had lost too many troops, and the royal family was rebuilding its defenses with reserve forces. Levi's enlarged territory would extend westward toward the Wild Mountains beside the Cane River. In exchange, he would shoulder part of Grey Fortress's defensive burden. One valley on the map held another major road crossing the mountains toward the south. Build a frontline fortress there within 10 years, Vito said, and the eastern land became Levi's viscounty. Storm cannons positioned across that valley could cover the road and block another orc advance. Levi studied the map longer than the title paperwork. A larger territory meant more land, more villages, more resources, and another direction enemies could enter from. A viscount title was prestige. That valley was an invoice payable in stone, soldiers, and blood. Still, the terms were useful enough that Levi accepted. Stormwind was becoming a shield for Grey Fortress, because it was already strong enough to be useful. And then another request followed almost immediately. With the Dawn Festival approaching, Levi needed to travel to Canglin City for formal investiture. Marcus Vito also hinted that Prince Thompson enjoyed befriending capable frontier nobles. Levi politely avoided promising support to any prince before even entering the capital. Palace struggles could wait. He still had enemies in Canglin City who wanted him dead. That left only one reasonable travel companion in Levi's mind. Panda was drinking when Levi arrived carrying enough distilled milk liquor to make negotiation possible. Levi said he had been promoted and needed protection inside the royal capital. Panda complained, drank anyway, and gradually became less offended by the entire idea. 5 jars disappeared before Levi was convinced the bear had stopped planning to refuse. What exactly could frighten assassins more effectively than traveling beside a 9th-tier sacred beast? Before departure, Levi completed his Earth Element spell studies and fed them into the Earth Magic Tower. Magical patterns shifted inside his spiritual sea, until a new talent spell finally emerged. Earth Core Guardian gave Levi exactly what he had wanted, another layer of defensive power. Once terrified by roadside bandits, Levi now carried layered magic, night power, talents, and a saint-level companion. Yet Canglin City was dangerous precisely because strength there wore titles instead of animal hides. Panda also revealed a spatial realm large enough to carry supplies far beyond normal storage rings. Levi immediately looked at that hidden space with the expression of a merchant discovering free warehouses. Panda told him to stop calculating how much cargo could fit inside his personal domain. Late in December, they finally saw the royal capital rising from the winter landscape. Canglin City dwarfed every settlement Levi had crossed since arriving in Noah's world. An inner palace dominated the center, surrounded by a vast outer city and heavily developed suburbs. A towering mage tower and the Church of Dawn marked the city's skyline before the royal walls even appeared. 4 central legions guarded the capital alongside the Royal Knights and Royal Mage Order. This was not Stormwind, where every professional mattered by name. Canglin City could bury a frontier lord beneath institutions older than his entire family line. News of Levi's arrival spread through noble circles almost immediately. Earl Harden placed him in a villa normally reserved for an earl, which irritated several watching families. At first, the arrangement looked absurd until Panda's true strength became impossible to ignore. A high-ranking professional noticed the bear drinking nearby and treated him like an ordinary magical beast. Panda's temper answered before diplomacy could protect anyone. Ninth tier sacred pressure exploded across the area, silencing arrogance faster than noble etiquette ever could. Levi intervened before the confrontation became a funeral involving politically inconvenient corpses. Other ninth tier auras appeared nearby, and pics from the royal family arrived to calm Panda. Mocking laughter vanished as everyone who had dismissed Levi's escort stared at the enormous bear. That pretty boy exile had entered the capital carrying something nobles could not bully with genealogy. That revelation spread faster than any announcement about his coming title. Dalton and Tulip were already maneuvering around old grudges and new storm cannon deals. Some nobles wanted to use Levi against Angelus. Others wanted Angelus to pressure Levi for them. Levi wanted none of their elegant traps, but his existence had become useful to too many factions. On the first day of the new dawn year, the investiture ceremony finally began. Royal court officials confirmed Levi Lewis as Viscount of Stormwind before nobles who once considered him disposable. No sword crossed his throat. No assassin interrupted the ceremony. That almost made the day suspiciously peaceful. At the royal banquet afterward, discussions returned to storm cannons, trade, and the kingdom's political balance. Levi also learned more about Prince Paul, whose movements were restricted under intense royal scrutiny. Prince Thompson remained far more respected among military nobles, especially those who valued battlefield performance. Levi listened without choosing a banner, because surviving one succession struggle required avoiding the first convenient promise. He also reorganized his commercial plans, renaming his operation the Storm Merchant Guild. Trade could reach places Stormwind's soldiers could not, and Levi intended to make that network permanent. After returning north, however, politics quickly gave way to a simpler problem. Levi needed 4th-tier shark magical beasts to brew enough shark heart potion for his next night breakthrough. Little Kun became his underwater scout, searching the coastal waters for suitable packs. Adult white-tailed sharks were only 3rd tier, so Levi needed the stronger leaders hidden among them. He calculated that roughly 20 4th-tier shark beasts would provide enough materials for his planned potions. The hunt stretched across roughly a month and a half of dangerous coastal searching. By the time Levi returned with the final materials, another wall between him and 5th tier was already cracking. Back in Stormwind, Levi assigned Jenkins an even larger burden before beginning serious cultivation again. 40 villages needed farmland opened, and tens of thousands of new residents needed work before becoming a permanent liability. Jenkins received Anthony as a deputy, though the young blacksmith initially seemed destined for a completely different future. Levi wanted Anthony learning territory management because Stormwind needed administrators almost as badly as it needed mages. Another newcomer named Gagra surprised everyone during the army's magical talent testing. His dual wind and fire affinity turned a refugee's son into another professional candidate worth investing in. Stormwind kept doing that to Levi's expectations. Population arrived as mouths, then slowly revealed weapons, craftsmen, and talent. The expensive grain-feeding newcomers today could become officers and taxpayers a decade later. Levi finally locked himself away with shark heart potions and pushed the flame-breathing technique forward. Each dose burned through his body while the panel converted suffering into measurable progress. Then the barrier broke, and Levi stepped into the 5th tier as a silver knight. The panel immediately changed, multiplying the daily attribute points available for future growth. His sword techniques also fused into Extreme Strike, a personal combat skill that could continue evolving. More importantly, another random talent awakening became available. Levi spent the accumulated energy essence and watched a new ability appear before him. Undying Physique doubled physical recovery, battle aura recovery, and magical recovery at its basic stage. He poured essence into it again until the talent reached Silver Physique. Recovery increased 5-fold, making long battles and repeated spellcasting far less dangerous than before. Then came Bloodlust, a special effect that forced Levi to test the talent with his own blade. A fresh wound closed far faster than anything his old body could have survived. He stared at the fading cut and saw something more valuable than durability. Every healing potion saved in battle was money. Every shortened recovery was another day an officer remained useful. What would happen when an assassin discovered that wounding Levi only made killing him more complicated? Mia's report brought more good news before Levi could indulge that thought too long. Clay had reached the 3rd tier, while Wendy had advanced into the 4th tier as an Archmage. Garcia of the White Wolf Demi-Humans had also become a 3rd tier high-level warrior. More professionals were appearing across the army, finally correcting Stormwind's earlier dependence on a handful of names. Levi ordered iron armor production expanded until ordinary soldiers could receive far better protection. The 50 Royal Windchaser horses also arrived, each already a 1st-tier magical beast. Clay's cavalry squadron was finally becoming the unit Levi had imagined after the last Orc War. A charge from magical beast cavalry could decide a battlefield before infantry finished understanding what had happened. John completed the first pieces of flame armor at almost the same time. Third circle fire shield enchantments covered the armor, giving mounted professionals another defensive layer without sacrificing mobility. Levi originally planned lower-tier enchanted armor for the new squadron. Then he saw John's finished work and immediately raised the standard. If Stormwind was going to build a monster cavalry unit, cheap equipment would only create expensive funerals. The problem was material, because high-grade magical metal remained painfully scarce. Fire bronze could support better enchantments, but the Alpha Kingdom controlled very few known magical metal deposits. Even the Royal Storm Iron Mine was small enough that exports were tightly rationed. Levi could invent designs all day. A design without material was still just paper waiting beside a forge. Storm Professional Academy finally opened its doors to the next generation. Children between 10 and 14 from administrator, officer, and professional families entered the first organized training group. 19 students formed the initial class, small enough for Levi to watch every name personally. Once they began breathing techniques or meditation, each student owed 20 years of service to Stormwind. Some nobles might have called that harsh. Levi saw it as payment for training their families could never otherwise afford. He was creating professionals before their talents were wasted by poverty or ignorance. Better yet, the academy could teach exactly the specialties Stormwind expected to need later. The territory no longer had to pray that the next useful blacksmith or mage appeared by accident. Training people took years. That was precisely why Levi started before the need became desperate. During this period, his chaos meditation technique also reached the 5th-tier mage level. Knight and mage power were now climbing together, making Levi increasingly difficult to classify by ordinary professional standards. His first visit after the breakthrough was the academy and the nearby elementary school. Children studied letters while older candidates practiced the first steps toward extraordinary professions. Stormwind had once received starving serfs in cages, now was teaching their children how power worked. Then a far more dangerous lesson arrived from the wild mountains. But there was another problem. Panda's old enemy, the lava dragon Andreas, had become active again. The history between those two 9th-tier magical beasts was bad enough that Levi immediately went looking for Panda. Panda was asleep when Levi explained that the lava dragon had appeared nearby. The bear woke quickly once the name Andreas entered the conversation. Levi warned him against charging into a fight where the lava dragon's subordinates could surround him. Panda answered with the confidence of someone who had waited too long to settle an old score. Levi followed because allowing two 9th-tier creatures to reshape local politics unsupervised seemed even worse. They reached the primeval forest near the lava dragon's territory and separated before the confrontation began. Panda went forward. Levi stayed hidden, exactly as any cautious frontier lord should beside two saint-level monsters. Then the forest shook with roars heavy enough to send lesser magical beasts fleeing through the trees. Panda and Andreas had found each other. Levi listened to the destruction for a moment, then looked toward the lava dragon's suddenly underprotected territory. What was the safest way to participate in a 9th-tier grudge match? Levi's answer was shamelessly practical: rob the dragon while it was busy. He sent soul descent into a red-tailed monkey and slipped through the fighting around Andreas' emptied lair. The winged nether lions had already stripped away most treasures, leaving scattered coins, exposed fire copper, and one overlooked ring. The monkey grabbed several 100 pounds of fire copper before a glint near the cave mouth changed Levi's priorities. A ring lying among dragon treasure was exactly the kind of small object an escaping beast might never notice. Levi took it, then sent the monkey running east instead of returning directly toward any human-controlled ground. He refused to let an undead servant walk straight from Stormwind toward a 9th-tier dragon's home. Tracks could be followed, magical residue could be read. A careless shortcut might bring Andreas directly to Levi's walls. Several kilometers away, the monkey dropped both stolen prizes beneath a giant tree and kept running north alone. A 5th-tier undead collected the fire copper and ring later, breaking the trail between the theft and its actual owner. When Andreas eventually investigated, the evidence pointed toward rebellious magical beasts rather than one extremely greedy frontier viscount. Back in safety, Levi examined the ring and immediately forgot every complaint about the operation's inconvenience. It was the 6th-tier Serpent's Eye ring, carrying the dark spell Fear and a massive storage space. 1,000 cubic meters meant siege equipment, supplies, and treasure could disappear into something small enough for his hand. Inside waited a 6th-tier demon scale robe and a 6th-tier wind calamity staff. 3 6th-tier artifacts had come from one theft that Andreas still blamed on his own magical beasts. The stored spellbooks ranged across common elements, but the strongest material clearly belonged to an advanced wind mage. Levitation and Windstrike reached the 6th circle, while Windwing Strike climbed 1 level higher. Then Levi found the books that mattered even more than equipment. Frodo's 13 Formations appeared again, this time with the 2nd volume beside the 1st. The new volume contained Undead Prison, 9 Mist Illusion, Unceasing Wind and Fire, and Deadly Water Prison Arrays. Stormwind had once begged for walls strong enough to survive raiders. Now Levi was collecting blueprints for magical prisons. But the last book made him stop turning pages quickly. Jones's adventure notes recorded treasure hunts across huge stretches of the northern continent. Jones had explored abyssal warrior graveyards, ancient holy towers, and ruins dangerous enough to frighten ordinary high-tier professionals. The scale of those journeys suggested a 9th-tier Archmage with centuries of life behind every entry. Near the end, one location remained marked but apparently unexplored. The Lich Prison Tower stood somewhere inside the Savage Ancient Forest, deep within the central Savage Mountains. Jones suspected an ancient Lich had once been imprisoned there, which made the absence of a completed exploration especially interesting. Maybe Jones died before reaching it. Maybe something else ended the notebook first. What kind of treasure made a Saint-level explorer mark a destination and never return to write the next page? Levi closed the notes instead of rushing toward another ancient death trap with insufficient strength. Future treasure was still treasure, he decided, especially when nobody charged storage fees for waiting. One dragon raid had produced magical armor, a staff, array knowledge, a huge ring, and directions toward another dangerous fortune. Andreas had lost treasure without losing blood. Levi had gained years of research without paying tuition. By the time Panda returned, Levi had already hidden the most valuable lesson inside Stormwind's growing archive. More surprising was the sight of a female half-elf who looked almost exactly like Wendy. Wendy and Amy were twins, sharing even a magical aura close enough to confuse unfamiliar observers. Levi discovered that fact only after nearly embarrassing himself in front of both sisters. Panda found the entire situation much more entertaining than Levi did. The tribe also held knowledge and resources Stormwind badly needed. One discovery began with something that looked almost insultingly ordinary. Bitter sugarcane grew there in enough quantity that people could dig it up without treating every stalk like treasure. Yet the plant was a genuine 3rd-tier magical potion material. Levi tasted its possibilities faster than anyone around him understood why sugarcane had made him so excited. Stormwind already understood sugar production. A magical sugarcane crop meant food, trade, and cultivation could overlap. He offered white sugar to Amy while asking about acquiring and transplanting the bitter sugarcane. The half-elves saw a crop. Levi saw fields producing potion ingredients at agricultural scale. What happened when a rare cultivation material stopped being rare because farmers could plant it? The answer could rewrite Stormwind's professional economy before neighboring nobles even noticed. Levi returned with Wendy and began planting preparations as soon as agreements allowed. 10 days after planting work began, the autumn harvest across Stormwind started as well. Drell, the powerful half-elf warrior, had already returned to his tribe after dealing with the lava dragon situation. Stormwind suddenly looked peaceful again, which on the frontier usually meant trouble was assembling somewhere else. This time the warning arrived through Klein at Grey Fortress. Rebellion had spread through territories south of the fortress under the Wilderness Brotherhood's influence. Cultists were turning desperate serfs into disposable armies using religion, coercion, and berserk potions. Several noble territories had already collapsed while surviving lords retreated towards stronger positions. And then the royal court ordered Levi to send troops north and reinforce Grey Fortress immediately. Levi did not hesitate, because losing Grey Fortress would place the rebellion directly against Stormwind's southern approaches. He ordered captured cultists transferred to the mining island, where their preaching could be aimed at orc prisoners instead. Even enemy doctrine had a use if pointed away from Stormwind's own population. Amy asked whether Levi intended to send her back to the half-elves. Levi kept her in Stormwind, where her connection to Wendy and her abilities were already becoming useful. Then he began choosing the army that would march to Grey Fortress. The force needed enough strength to matter without stripping Stormwind's own defenses bare. Magical beast cavalry, professional officers, archers, infantry, and undead support all entered the deployment plan. Levi also considered the possibility that rebel bandits might exploit any failed siege to spill into the Grey Mountains. This was no longer simply about helping Klein defend a fortress. Stormwind was protecting the entire barrier between its growing population and a collapsing southern frontier. When Levi finally entered Grey Fortress with his troops, Klein came to meet him personally. Klein looked relieved enough that ceremony disappeared from the greeting almost immediately. The fortress had faced orc armies before, but this enemy behaved differently. Wilderness Brotherhood leaders could turn ordinary desperation into temporary battlefield strength through berserk potions. Outside the walls, the rebel host numbered around 50,000. Levi's undead force numbered only about 3,000. That difference would have terrified the man who first arrived at Grey Fortress years earlier. Now Levi simply started deciding which enemy units were worth killing first. The rebels had quantity. Grey Fortress had walls, professionals, magical weapons, and a lord who enjoyed unfair advantages. Berserk potions made ordinary cultists stronger, but the strength came with a price their leaders happily ignored. Some would die when the potion's effects collapsed even if no defender touched them. To the Wilderness Brotherhood, those bodies were doctrine converted into temporary manpower. To Levi, every berserk cultist was an enemy expensive enough to count as military merit. The first heavy clash came when rebel elites advanced beneath the pressure of their own fanatic army. Stormwind's undead moved forward, drawing attention away from the fortress troops waiting behind them. Then a 6th-tier gold warrior pushed into range, confident enough to treat Levi as a lesser threat. Levi answered by unleashing 9 suns burst directly into him. Fire compressed, detonated, and erased the distance between confidence and death almost instantly. The 6th-tier professional dropped before most nearby soldiers understood who had launched the spell. Klein's men stared at Levi with a new problem in their eyes. They had known he was a powerful knight and necromancer. Now his fire magic was killing mid-level professionals too. And the 7th-tier leader behind the rebel army had just begun moving toward the battlefield. Osmar had prepared thousands of berserk potions because he believed numbers could overwhelm Levi's undead before the walls stabilized. The plan worked just well enough to become dangerous. Drugged cultists surged forward with swollen muscles, red eyes, and no concern for wounds that should have stopped them. Grey Fortress absorbed the impact, but the pressure spread across multiple sections faster than defenders could rotate. Some rebels reached the walls while others forced the gates into a grinding struggle of steel and bodies. Levi burned through spells while his undead tied down professionals, who would otherwise have slaughtered ordinary soldiers. Then Osmar entered the fight with the confidence of a 7th-tier powerhouse. A 7th-tier enemy should have been beyond Levi's comfortable killing range. Comfortable had never been part of Levi's advancement method. Osmar dodged the obvious lines of fire and rushed sideways when the fortress's 7th-tier magical crossbow targeted him. He had studied Levi's ranged attacks and expected another attempt to keep distance. Levi let him believe that expectation for several more heartbeats. For several breaths, Osmar's approach looked almost successful. He crossed broken stone, burning corpses, and retreating cultists while Levi held position instead of fleeing. Klein shouted from farther along the wall, but there was no time to explain what Levi was waiting for. Osmar pushed through the final gap with battle aura wrapped around his body. And then Levi changed the range of the fight completely. Speed, night power, and layered magic collapsed the distance before Osmar could rebuild his rhythm. The 7th-tier fanatic discovered that Levi's strongest weapon was still the number of ways he could attack. Their clash tore stone from the wall and sent nearby cultists stumbling away from the pressure. Osmar survived the first exchange, which only convinced Levi to make the second one uglier. 9 suns burst cut off one retreat while sword pressure forced another response. Osmar tried to break toward the weaker side of the defense. Levi caught him before the battlefield could give him room. The final strike dropped the 7th-tier leader amid the same cultists he had spent as expendable weapons. One commander had cost the rebellion years of cultivation. His corpse became Levi's energy essence within seconds. There was no time to enjoy it. Grey Fortress had already been partially breached while Levi dealt with Osmar. The city walls crawled with berserk cultists, and defenders were dying in clusters around shattered positions. Another Wilderness Brotherhood powerhouse, Pranoi, began ordering retreat once Osmar's death became impossible to hide. But retreating after entering a fortress was much easier to command than to survive. Stormwind's magical beast cavalry struck the collapsing formation next. Clay led the charge through a gap where rebel formations had already begun collapsing. Wing chaser horses turned armored professionals into a moving blade that ordinary cultists could barely track. Berserk strength meant little once riders refused to stop long enough for fists and crude weapons to connect. The squadron killed nearly 400 berserk cultists with only around 60 riders. Those numbers were impressive until Levi looked at the bodies required to produce them. Every cavalry victory still carried broken armor, injured mounts, and names that would need compensation afterward. Victor's regular cavalry also entered the pursuit, hitting ordinary rebels as their courage finally collapsed. Outside the fortress, serfs began running before officers could force them back into formation. The rebellion had been built from people desperate enough to follow anyone promising power. Once their miracle failed, most remembered they had families instead of causes. Levi ordered pursuit anyway, because another uprising would be even crueler than capturing them now. Some fled into the Grey Mountains where hunger, beasts, and bandits waited beyond the roads. Others surrendered in masses as cavalry closed around them. By evening, the fortress smelled of medicine, smoke, blood, and the sour residue of berserk potions. Wendy moved through the wounded while exhausted professionals sat against walls too tired to maintain dignity. Stormwind's losses were serious, but the army had not broken. More than 500 Stormwind soldiers had fought, with 163 dead and 13 disabled. 24 of the dead were professionals, each one representing years of training no treasury could instantly replace. Victor's cavalry lost 4 killed among 13 casualties. Clay's magical beast cavalry had paid much less for the damage it inflicted. What did nearly 400 enemy dead cost Stormwind? A few dozen cavalry injuries, damaged equipment, exhausted mounts, and another reminder that elite units saved lives by ending fights faster. Parker compiled Levi's personal achievements before the fortress clerks finished their own counting. Stormwind had done this too many times to wait nervously around somebody else's desk. The broader battle had killed 213 Wilderness Brotherhood professionals. That total included 1 7th tier, 4 6th tier, 8 5th tier, and 14 4th tier professionals. Magical crossbows and giant crossbows accounted for roughly half the professional kills. More than 3,000 berserk cultists died, including hundreds who collapsed from the potion itself. Nearly 6,000 ordinary serfs and cult members also died during the fighting and pursuit. Stormwind alone killed 856 berserk cultists and more than 1,200 ordinary rebels. Levi personally accounted for the 7th tier leader, 1 6th tier, 3 5th tier, and many lower professionals. His final merit total included a 3rd-class merit, a 4th-class merit, and several lower merits. Wendy earned a 5th-class merit for her battlefield support. The numbers sounded glorious until Levi compared them with the captured serfs waiting under guard. Under kingdom rules, 40 surrendered serfs handed over to the crown equaled 1 9th-class merit. Not one of those 40 people was merely another rescued mouth. Together they represented nearly 200 gold coins in labor. A 9th-class merit converted to only about 50 gold coins. Levi did not need philosophy to decide which option Stormwind could afford. Those prisoners were mouths tonight. By spring, they could become farmers worth several times their paper merit. This was where noble warfare became economics without changing clothes. Levi claimed population instead of exchanging every captive for military credit. Other inexperienced barons argued over counts while Parker had already produced Stormwind's rough report. Levi checked the difference, found it minor, and moved on. That efficiency amused Klein, who was still watching several nobles interrogate their own subordinates over numbers. One battle had separated frontier veterans from men who merely possessed titles. Later that night, Levi finally examined Osmer's storage ring. Most of it held Wilderness Brotherhood cultivation records too dangerous and too useless for Stormwind to circulate. A special box inside looked suspicious enough that Levi refused to open it near himself first. He carried it to Panda's sleeping area and pointed the container toward the giant bear. Panda remained asleep after the lid opened, which Levi considered an acceptable safety test. Inside lay a bloodline fruit, a 6th-tier treasure perfectly suited to Mia. The fruit could help a 5th-tier warrior break through while strengthening bloodline aptitude. Mia's future 6th-tier advancement had just become far cheaper. Osmer had arrived to destroy Grey Fortress. His storage ring would now finance Stormwind's strongest White Wolf warrior. That was one of Levi's favorite kinds of battlefield irony. The panel offered another surprise after he poured essence into ultimate speed. At maximum development, the talent created a new special effect called Air Wings. Levi could now hover and fly briefly without relying on a mount. He tested the ability at night where curious soldiers would not gather beneath him. Air Wings carried him several meters above the ground before he began timing the effect carefully. Around 10 minutes of hovering was possible, though active movement shortened the usable duration. Normal flight could cover roughly 5 kilometers before the wings weakened. It was far less than true high-tier flight, yet enough to rewrite how Levi approached terrain and ambushes. A wall was no longer automatically an obstacle. A cliff was no longer automatically protection. More importantly, opponents below 6th tier might never expect a knight to suddenly leave the ground. Levi had once needed Panda to cross the sky. Now the bear was becoming optional for shorter problems. Panda would probably consider that excellent news. The larger rebellion also began collapsing once the Church of Dawn committed serious forces. Priests and mages arrived carrying church relics designed specifically to counter cult sorcery. Tricks that had empowered desperate serfs suddenly failed beneath divine magic. Without supernatural shortcuts, many rebel armies became what they had always secretly been: frightened civilians around a few professionals. Prince Arthur ordered Grey Fortress to send forces south and reclaim fallen baronies while the opportunity lasted. Levi saw free military merit and immediately pushed Klein toward taking command of the operation. Klein hesitated because abandoning Grey Fortress for personal merit could become a career-ending mistake if anything happened. Levi offered to remain behind and guard the fortress himself. He also offered Clay's magical beast cavalry, provided Klein paid them for the additional service. Klein's hesitation disappeared almost instantly after hearing that offer. The man needed battle merit if he wanted his own noble title, and this campaign looked unusually profitable. 3 recovering barons also attached themselves to Klein's force instead of competing for command. They already possessed titles. Recovering their territories mattered more than squeezing every last merit from the operation. Klein marched with the 8th Battalion, reserve troops, field artillery, and Clay's cavalry. Their objective was to reclaim 6 baronies bordering the Grey Mountains. Levi stayed behind while Stormwind began transporting captured population home before winter closed the roads. 3 infantry companies and Victor's cavalry escorted roughly 24,000 serfs towards Stormwind. The territory was not ready for that many people. Snow would make waiting even worse. Every day of delay traded planning convenience for frozen corpses on mountain roads. Levi chose overcrowded villages over frozen burial pits outside. Then the Church of Dawn escalated its campaign beyond ordinary suppression. A 9th-tier Archmage arrived carrying the Divine Goddess necklace to hunt the highest-level cult threats. Working with Royal Saint-level forces, the Church struck enemies that ordinary armies could not safely approach. One 9th-tier evil mage died while 2 other top threats were forced to flee. The rebellion across several provinces began collapsing almost immediately afterward. Grey Fortress's expedition returned with reclaimed territory, prisoners, and another pile of military records. The fortress earned 3 4th-class merits from the campaign. Levi received 1, Klein received 1, and the remaining merit was divided according to contribution. Klein had moved 1 step closer to the noble title he had chased for years. Levi had collected another reward for guarding a fortress while other men fought farther south. Sometimes the best battlefield position was simply being strong enough that everyone trusted you with the door. At the victory banquet, Klein finally allowed himself to look satisfied. The next morning, Levi led Stormwind's forces home before another crisis could borrow them. Near the Cane River, however, buyers delivered another 2,000 refugee serfs from the Grey Mountains. The former bandit king had gathered them during the chaos because the mountains could not support endless refugees. Stormwind exchanged supplies and absorbed the population before winter could turn displacement into starvation. Levi's territory had become the place people were sent because it possessed land, food, and enough soldiers to keep them alive. That sounded like success until Jenkins saw another column of mouths approaching his villages. Grain prices were already painful, and the territory would probably need southern imports for another year or 2. Levi accepted the cost because cultivated land would eventually replace purchased grain. A hungry refugee today could become a permanent field worker once spring returned. Then Mia received the bloodline fruit Osmer had accidentally delivered through death. Her breakthrough pushed the White Wolf warrior into the 6th tier. Mia thanked Levi with far more seriousness than usual, promising to serve him wholeheartedly. Levi heard loyalty. Stormwind gained another high-level professional without begging an outside family for protection. That difference mattered more than the fruit's market price. Little Kun was also growing dangerously fast under the Dragon Ball's influence. Around the Dawn Festival, the young beast reached 4th tier and immediately attracted trouble beyond its level. A 5th-tier 7-clawed green-headed squid chased Little Kun all the way back towards Storm Bay. Mia led the response and killed the pursuing beast before it could turn the harbor into a feeding ground. Stormwind had gained its 6th-tier warrior, but the sea was already presenting the next problem with wings and teeth. Not long after Mia's breakthrough, a 7th-tier half-elf mage arrived riding a 5th-tier Pegasus. Elder Norm came from the half-elf tribe, bringing another reminder that Stormwind's alliances now extended beyond humans. Wendy handled much of the contact while Levi focused on what the bitter sugarcane harvest had finally produced. The first batches of bitter sugarcane wine were stronger than ordinary liquor and far more valuable than simple spirits. Levi adjusted the process until the sharpest burn softened without destroying the drink's underlying strength. That made the wine easier to sell, easier to drink, and considerably easier to underestimate. Wendy, Amy, and Mia discovered that final point during one evening at the manor. Their usual confidence dissolved into red faces, confused laughter, and an increasingly questionable understanding of personal balance. Levi watched 3 dangerous women lose a battle against sugarcane and decided the product clearly had commercial potential. Servants eventually carried the drunk residents toward their rooms before dignity suffered any further casualties. The next morning, Stormwind gained another lesson from the same incident. Magical wine could become a luxury export. Every barrel could sell for more than grain while using crops Stormwind could reproduce locally. A field of bitter sugarcane was starting to look suspiciously like a mint with leaves. Then Getty rushed in with news that wiped the amusement from Levi's face. An injured flying magical beast had appeared near the territory. Levi moved immediately, because capturing a wounded flying beast was far easier than purchasing one from a noble family. The creature turned out to be a 6th-tier 2-winged nether lion. Even injured, it possessed enough strength to tear apart ordinary cavalry before Stormwind could surround it. Levi wanted it alive. That single decision made the fight more dangerous. Killing a wounded beast required force. Capturing it required control without ruining the wings that made it valuable. Magical restraints tightened while the nether lion thrashed against the ground and tried to regain altitude. Levi layered Earth Core Guardian's gravity around it until the beast could no longer climb cleanly. Clay's people prepared a 6th-tier magical giant crossbow in case restraint failed. From a distance, they nearly fired when the lion suddenly rose again. Then they saw Levi and his people in the same line, and stopped before solving the problem by killing everyone nearby. The wounded beast hovered between escape and capture while every nearby weapon stayed ready. Levi increased the gravity while other restraints pulled the body downward, without twisting the damaged wing. The lion hit the ground hard enough to throw dirt over nearby soldiers. Wendy and Amy hurried forward once the immediate danger faded. Healing the creature mattered now, because a crippled 6th-tier flying beast was an expensive failure. Stormwind had captured something most Viscount territories could only dream of owning. Yet the lion's behavior soon raised questions bigger than transport or cavalry. Its parents were apparently still alive and had settled on a deserted island north of Stormwind. That meant the captured beast was connected to stronger magical beasts somewhere just beyond Levi's coastline. Had it fled here by accident, or had someone else forced the family into this region? Levi began monitoring the situation instead of rushing toward another unknown high-tier nest. His danger sense soon found something much closer than the island. Malice suddenly appeared among Stormwind's own ordinary serfs. The sensation was faint enough to be terrifying, because the hostile person behaved like an ordinary resident. Levi quietly brought Mia, Clay Jenkins, and a small group to investigate without alarming the village. Jenkins looked grim before they even arrived. Someone had hidden beneath his administration for more than a year. The village contained refugees rescued from Baron Otto's territory after the Orc War. Levi initially wondered whether the Dalton family had planted an observer among them. Rather than arresting everyone, he turned the investigation into an ordinary distribution of dried fish. Families stepped forward one by one, thanked their lord, and returned home carrying food. Levi used proximity, body language, and his innate perception while appearing to do nothing unusual. At the final household, a middle-aged couple emerged and knelt with the others. The moment the man lowered himself, Levi felt the hidden hostility clearly. There was the spy Levi had been hunting. Mia knocked the woman unconscious while Levi isolated the man before the village noticed anything. His name was Brian, and he possessed no professional cultivation whatsoever. That made the answer more disturbing instead of less. Brian said he did not even know which family had turned him into a sleeper agent. He had been taught to read, given simple instructions, then implanted with an insect inside his brain. Any thought of betrayal would trigger the creature and kill him. His assignment was almost insultingly patient. Live like an ordinary serf and wait. No sabotage, no assassination, no urgent report. What kind of organization could afford to bury ordinary people across the kingdom for years without using them? Levi's thoughts went immediately toward powers far above a minor noble family. Brian described enough for Levi to connect the method with the Scythe King's strange insect techniques. That implied someone with access to monstrous power was preparing something on a kingdom-wide scale. A marquis or earl still operated beneath royal authority. A ducal family possessed enough independence and ambition to imagine replacing the royal family entirely. Levi had caught one thread. Pulling it openly could put Stormwind under the gaze of whoever held the other end. He could not report everything either, because explaining Brian's interrogation would expose the Dominator contract. So Levi chose the frontier solution. Clean his own house first and let larger institutions worry about the kingdom. Jenkins received orders to treat the discovered sleepers as cult-linked criminals. Collective responsibility would be emphasized across villages before spring planting began. Stormwind's population had reached tens of thousands, too many for Levi to personally sense every dangerous mind forever. The administration needed systems that frightened neighbors into reporting suspicious behavior before professional spies could settle comfortably. One hidden serf cost almost nothing to feed. The secret behind him might be worth a duke's head. That was an investment Levi had never agreed to receive. Over the next several days, he helped Jenkins search for more possible scytheworm sleepers. The work produced caution rather than certainty, because the network was built precisely to remain dormant. Levi decided strength mattered more than chasing a conspiracy whose center he could not yet reach. If the royal family and Church of Dawn had survived thousands of years, they could investigate their own palace shadows. Stormwind would prepare for whichever shadow eventually crossed its border. During this tense period, another discovery came from the mining island. New Yi reported that workers had struck a strange black spring in the east. Levi expected dirty groundwater until he saw the liquid himself. He brought flame close, and the surface caught fire immediately. Water poured onto the burning liquid only spread the flames more violently. Levi laughed, because Blue Star knowledge finally recognized something Noah's people treated as strange black water. The black liquid was oil, exactly as Levi suspected. Stormwind had accidentally uncovered a resource Levi understood just well enough to become dangerous with. He ordered every orc who knew the exact location removed before information could escape the island. Then he filled empty storm spirit jars with samples and carried them back to John. John initially treated the black liquid like another unfamiliar magical material. Levi demonstrated how it burned and explained that refining might produce several different useful substances. He could not reproduce modern petroleum engineering from memory, but he could point an alchemist toward the right questions. Asphalt, gasoline, and diesel became rough directions rather than recipes. John heard a research problem. Levi heard roads, fuel, fire weapons, and industries that did not exist yet. What if Stormwind's most important magical resource contained no magic at all? That possibility made the Black Spring more valuable than its appearance suggested. Instead, Levi converted natural caves near Panda's residence into sealed oil depots using earth magic. The giant bear was conveniently absent again, which made appropriating nearby caves much easier. Stone walls, sealed entrances, and small upper vents turned the caverns into enormous hidden reservoirs. Levi emptied his serpent eye ring and used the winged nether lion to move oil personally. After around 10 days of repeated transport, the depots held roughly 3,000 tons. Then he sealed the original well and refused to expand extraction until proper infrastructure existed. 3,000 tons sounded like wealth. One accidental fire could turn it into Stormwind's largest funeral pyre. Levi preferred sleeping on buried treasure to burning beside it. For several days, the oil discovery seemed important enough to dominate Levi's planning. Panda returned with news that made petroleum feel ordinary again. The bear had vanished for months while working with lava dragon Andreas around a newly discovered ruin. Levi stared at him, wondering when magical beasts had started collecting archaeological hobbies. Panda insisted he had found the place while searching for potion fruits. Levi immediately remembered the potion trees Panda once claimed the Gale wolves had destroyed. Panda changed the subject so quickly that guilt became almost visible. The ancient ruin mattered far more than potion trees now. Panda said it existed in a separate dimensional space connected to a deserted island north of Stormwind. He and Andreas had spent months trying to force the entrance without success. The aura around the place did not resemble modern magical ruins. Andreas's inherited dragon memories suggested something far older, an ancient wizard site. Levi stopped caring about the suspicious potion trees immediately. Ancient mages had already left priceless legacies. A wizard ruin might preserve knowledge from before those traditions existed. Panda wanted Levi there because the entrance responded to spellcaster structures rather than brute magical force. Levi pointed out that 2 9th-tier sacred beasts failing did not magically make a 5th-tier array master omnipotent. Panda answered that trying the entrance would cost nothing. Less than an hour later, the bear carried him to the island anyway. The fire-breathing dragon lizard and crimson wolf dragon still guarded the area around the exposed entrance. Corpses from winged nether lions proved Andreas's internal magical beast war had reached the island too. Levi asked what the Lion King had stolen and finally learned about the 8th-tier life crystal. Andreas had prepared it for descendants that did not even exist yet. Panda found that level of parental planning ridiculous. Levi found the crystal's value easier to understand. The ruin's entrance stood behind a mysterious protective array scarred by repeated 9th-tier attacks. Levi threw a small fireball at the barrier and watched it vanish without producing a ripple. He tried other attributes. The array absorbed them just as completely. Multiple magical elements were woven together in patterns unlike the modern formations Levi had studied. Even damaged by time, the barrier remained beyond what he could simply break. Panda asked whether Levi could handle it anyway. Levi said an ancient legendary formation was not going to surrender because Panda had brought a 5th-tier mage. They would need Figsel, whose array mastery reached the 8th tier. Panda sat down to drink while waiting, disappointed that his human problem-solving tool required another specialist. Levi stayed near the barrier and began studying it instead of wasting the delay. Modern combat arrays usually emphasized one element or a limited combination. This ancient structure blended many attributes without the instability current mages expected. Levi possessed affinities across 10 elements. Most available arrays treated that advantage like an inconvenience. What if the ruins pattern showed him how to make all those affinities cooperate? He spent 3 days tracing relationships, comparing spell structures, and filling pages with failed interpretations. Then Andreas arrived with Figzel and 2 7th-tier half-elf archmages. The lava dragon mocked Panda before anyone had even started discussing treasure division. Panda answered the mockery by threatening Andreas with another fight. Figzel looked between the 2 9th-tier beasts and wisely refused to begin negotiations while they were still arguing. The argument became a brief clash in the sky while Levi quietly asked Figzel technical questions below. She answered generously, and several problems that had blocked his understanding opened almost immediately. Levi's comprehension impressed the 8th-tier array master enough that their discussion continued after Panda and Andreas landed. Treasure shares were finally negotiated because even sacred beasts understood that fighting over unopened ruins was embarrassing. The barrier would be broken together, and whatever waited inside would be divided by agreed proportions afterward. Then the ancient array began opening, and everyone stopped arguing about ownership long enough to wonder what had survived behind it. The dimensional barrier did not open into treasure halls. It opened into a dead landscape untouched by ordinary weather. Buildings stood in various stages of decay beneath an atmosphere that felt sealed away from Noah's living world. The first obstacle appeared as a dark forest where even Panda and Andreas lost confidence in their senses. Andreas tried flying above the trees and was violently forced back down by an unseen restriction. A no-fly zone covered the area, leaving 2 9th-tier sacred beasts walking like irritated travelers. None of them entered casually. Figzel carried formation scrolls while Levi layered curse removal over himself and nearby companions. The spell eased a suffocating pressure that had been clinging to his body since entering the trees. Then Levi felt malice from somewhere none of the stronger beings could detect. He warned that living creatures were watching them through whatever force blocked higher-level perception. Panda, Andreas, and Figzel all looked at him because none of them sensed anything. A heartbeat later, Levi shouted toward the rear. 9 suns burst exploded into the darkness and exposed 2 grotesque creatures mid-ambush. One carried multiple beast heads fused together. Another had human and animal features grown into the same body. Andreas burned both monsters apart and judged them around 7th-tier strength. They looked less like a natural species than experiments someone had forgotten to bury. The lava dragon called them mutated beasts created through ancient wizard research. That explanation answered their origin and created a worse question. How had experimental creatures survived long enough to attack intruders after the wizard era vanished? Levi's perception caught another wave before the answer arrived. More than 50 mutated beasts surrounded the group and attacked with enough coordination to prove genuine intelligence. Some even cast spells while others deliberately tried to reach Levi on Panda's shoulder. Panda and Andreas tore through the attackers from opposite sides, turning the forest into fire and impact. Nearly 20 mutated corpses remained before the survivors finally retreated. Levi blasted one open afterward, checking whether wizard experiments might contain useful cores or embedded artifacts. Panda mocked him for searching disgusting flesh like a merchant inspecting damaged goods. Levi said treasure had no obligation to look clean. Nobody found anything worth carrying, but the encounter revealed how dangerous the ruins remained even after ages of decay. Once they left the forest, everyone's perception returned, though flight remained impossible. They followed the direct route towards structures that looked most likely to belong to the ruins' owner. Old buildings collapsed under the pressure created by Panda and Andreas simply moving too quickly nearby. Time had weakened materials that once survived forces beyond modern craftsmanship. Then Figzel detected formation fluctuations around a small lake and ordered everyone to stop. The array activated by itself, pulling surrounding elemental energy towards something hidden beneath the water. Figzel threw a 7th-tier formation scroll and froze the lake, interrupting the energy flow. Figzel had already acted several heartbeats too late. Levi's danger warning flashed for the first time while Panda stood beside him. A 9th-tier corpse demon had awakened below the lake. Ice exploded upward as a 15-meter humanoid body tore through the surface. Decay rolled from its skin while an ancient frame towered above even Panda and Andreas. The lava dragon recognized the corpse immediately. It had once been a titan, a race already extinct on Noah's continent. Ancient wizards had turned that 9th-tier body into a corpse demon and left it guarding the ruin. The creature charged before anyone could admire the craftsmanship. Panda met it directly and was sent flying by the collision. Levi simply watched the strongest ally he knew become airborne for exactly the wrong reason. Andreas's expression changed from curiosity to genuine caution. The Titan corpse carried absurd physical strength, even after losing living intelligence. Panda drank storm brew and combined drunken movement with flame intent to hold the giant in place. Andreas flooded the area with lava and sustained fire while Panda prevented the corpse from escaping. The fight lasted through an entire day and night. They did not truly overpower the Titan's body. They exhausted the stored energy animating it. When the corpse finally stopped resisting, Its outer damage looked almost insulting compared with the punishment it had absorbed. Titans had been one of Noah's strongest races before wizard civilization rose. Their scarcity, not weakness, had prevented them from dominating the entire continent. Levi stared at the fallen giant and immediately asked whether the corpse could somehow be reused. Figzel and the two sacred beasts looked at him like he had requested ownership of a mountain. A legendary wizard had bound the corpse. Levi was not going to casually rewrite that control. Then another question occurred to everyone almost simultaneously. How had a corpse survived so long without collapsing into dust? Figzel suspected a life crystal had preserved the body. Panda tore open the Titan's chest and found a 9th-tier life crystal as large as a human head. The dead guardian had spent ages protecting the ruins. Its heart now became somebody else's breakthrough resource. Andreas hesitated when the crystal appeared, because that treasure was valuable even to saint-level beings. Panda casually threw the enormous life crystal straight to Figzel. Her half-elf bloodline had been the barrier preventing advancement into the 9th tier. A 9th-tier life crystal could raise that bloodline enough to remove the ceiling. Andreas eventually agreed, and Levi did too. Figzel thanked all three with a seriousness that erased the earlier banter. One ancient corpse had just changed the future balance of power around Stormwind without joining a single modern war. That was before the group even reached the main wizard tower. The tower remained protected by formations that felt active rather than merely surviving. Levi wondered aloud whether the owner might still be alive inside. Panda immediately disliked that possibility because they had already broken in and started dividing property. Retreat remained an option, but nobody who had crossed this much danger wanted to leave before seeing the tower. So the entire group entered the wizard tower together. The interior felt completely different from the ruined world outside. Elemental energy remained dense, stable, and suitable for cultivation as if centuries had failed to cross the threshold. A strange alchemical administrator identified as Emon 9527 managed parts of the facility. Levi asked question after question, trying to determine whether the ancient wizard civilization had truly disappeared. Emon's responses revealed a structured wizard society far beyond what modern northern mages remembered. More than 100 ordinary disciples had once lived within this complex beneath the 9-colored venerable. The group decided to split their search rather than waste time moving through every area together. Andreas and Figzel searched residential spaces while Levi traveled with Panda through other sections. Materials rooms contained increasingly valuable remnants as they moved upward through the tower. Some doors demanded caution because Iman had allowed observation, not unrestricted looting. Panda viewed that distinction as unnecessarily legalistic for a civilization that appeared extinct. Levi viewed surviving security systems as a better argument than law. The 5th and 6th floors finally began producing treasures worth the danger. Wizard records identified the owner as the 9-colored venerable, once among the strongest figures of the Deep Blue Realm. He had served as speaker of a regional wizard council and later worked within a central governing body. After failing to become central speaker, he abandoned politics and returned to cultivating younger wizards. Levi found the biography oddly familiar in spirit, enormous power followed by frustration with institutions. Yet the tower's most important value lay in knowledge, not personal history. Ancient meditation methods, formations, experimental records, and cultivation theories appeared across the stored archives. Modern mages treated 10-element affinity as nearly impossible to use efficiently. The wizard records showed professions that had once manipulated far stranger combinations. Every document widened the gap between Noah's current magical system and what had existed before it. The higher they climbed, however, the less abandoned the tower felt. An 8th-tier alchemical dragon guarded the staircase to another level. Panda and Andreas eventually smashed through it with brute force that would have horrified any ancient engineer. Then spiritual entities began appearing inside upper floors. One 7th-tier soul attacked Levi and vanished into his panel instead of killing him. The result shocked Levi more than the attack itself. His panel could devour soul bodies, even when ordinary physical combat offered little protection. That discovery became dangerous when stronger souls began moving nearby. Panda rushed to Levi after sensing something wrong and carried him down several floors. Andreas and Figzel joined the retreat as high-tier soul entities pursued them through the tower. They escaped beyond the barrier surrounding the building, and the souls stopped at the boundary. Even Andreas had been harmed by a 9th-tier soul body during the withdrawal. Levi looked back at the tower with fear and greed fighting for the same space. If the panel could consume those souls, the tower contained energy essence far beyond anything he could safely farm. Panda told him that safe farming ended where 9th-tier ghosts started injuring dragons. Levi reluctantly agreed to stop treating every lethal phenomenon as a resource node. The group instead examined treasures found in safer sections. One discovery was a dragon blood tree protected by an ancient formation. Dragon blood fruit could strengthen sub-dragon bloodlines and potentially push them toward true dragon purity. Even a 9th-tier pure-blooded dragon could benefit by improving bloodline and legendary advancement chances. The fruit could also awaken dragon bloodline talent spells under favorable conditions. Andreas's interest in those dragon blood fruits became immediately obvious. Figsil worked on breaking the protective formation while everyone negotiated division before grabbing anything. She placed high-tier life and magic crystals into the tree's base after opening the formation. The ancient plant had survived because somebody had built systems capable of feeding it long after the owner vanished. The group divided available treasures according to the arrangement Panda had fought so enthusiastically to secure. Levi eventually received 4 7th-tier items, 6 6th-tier items, 12 5th-tier items, and 5 4th-tier items. He also received 5 Hell Soul Stones among the final allocation. 2 of his 7th-tier selections were breakthrough treasures for knights and warriors. Mia would eventually receive the warrior item when her cultivation reached the proper threshold. Klein could borrow the knight breakthrough treasure when his own path reached the same wall. Levi also chose 2 7th-tier life crystals for Wendy and Amy. As first-generation half-elves with life element potential, those crystals could raise their bloodline ceiling toward 9th tier. Stormwind had entered the ruins with 1 5th-tier lord and left carrying futures for several different professionals. The treasure pile was impressive. The knowledge inside Levi's head might be worth even more. 1 devoured 7th-tier soul had belonged to an ancient wizard alchemist. Its memories arrived fragmented, chaotic, and almost useless in their raw form. Levi spent 2 full days writing down everything he could recover before the details faded or tangled together. Recipes, formations, artifacts, meditation systems, and alchemical methods slowly separated into recognizable categories. The memories included 6th-tier arrays such as War Guardian, Dark Sun Seal, and Earth Imprisonment. They also preserved techniques modern northern magic had apparently forgotten completely. Levi had once hunted isolated recipes like treasure. Now he had pieces of an entire profession's intellectual skeleton. What could Stormwind become if that knowledge stopped belonging to one dead wizard and entered an academy? He could not simply distribute everything, because ancient methods might contain dangers modern users did not understand. So Levi planned to test the meditation methods through the panel and adapt them before wider teaching. Some records suggested connections to Dragonvein wizards, Sea Race wizards, and other specialized ancient branches. The most immediately usable inheritance was the giant mountain body refining method. It strengthened the body through a wizard system Levi could grind with attribute points once properly learned. A stronger body amplified the value of undying physique, night power, and bloodlust at the same time. One technique could reinforce several advantages Levi already possessed, instead of creating another separate path to maintain. He copied selected alchemical materials for John, including unfinished portions of Flamel's alchemy. John had already proven he could turn incomplete enchanting knowledge into functioning equipment. Now Levi wanted to see what that same mind would do when handed fragments from the Age of Wizards. Levi did not stop at alchemy once the Ruin expedition ended. He resumed learning 5th Circle lightning spells while Stormwind's new inheritance settled into research rooms and locked archives. 5 Lightning Strike became the final piece needed to trigger another talent transformation inside his lightning magic tower. The resulting spell was Thunder Dragon Instant Kill. It fused multiple lightning techniques into a strike built around speed, penetration, and almost no warning time. Levi tested the spell and immediately understood why slower professionals would hate fighting him even more now. Extreme speed had already made his sword difficult to answer. Thunder Dragon Instant Kill gave his magic the same cruel habit of arriving before opponents finished reacting. He also confirmed that ancient wizard potions could function for modern mages under the right conditions. That meant the Ruins recipes were not archaeological curiosities. They were production opportunities. While Levi studied wind magic next, buyers sent word from the Grey Mountains. His people had discovered a copper deposit. Levi stopped studying and immediately prepared to inspect it. Magical metals were rare, but ordinary copper still mattered for tools, equipment, construction trade, and whatever technologies Stormwind developed later. Buyers guided him toward the site while Clay and other officers were called in. The discovery sat in disputed mountain territory, where possession mattered more than maps nobody respected. Levi secured the area before outside nobles could discover what had been found. A mine was only wealth after soldiers survived long enough to dig it. That required workers, guards, roads, storage, and the political strength to keep somebody stronger from claiming ownership. Levi had enough of those pieces to make the copper worth defending. His next shortage was expertise from somewhere much farther away. Stormwind needed shipbuilders capable of constructing large ocean-going vessels. The coast had become too important for Levi to keep treating the sea like a hunting ground instead of a highway. He returned to Grey Fortress and found Quint, the slave trader who had once treated him like a doomed frontier customer. Quint's politeness had improved dramatically now that Levi controlled a viscounty and traveled with saint-level connections. Levi asked for enslaved craftsmen skilled in building large ships. Quint explained that the Kingdom of Sicily tightly restricted exports of exactly those specialists. Levi answered by placing 50,000 gold coins into the deal. Money did not erase the difficulty. It made Quint personally responsible for finding a way through it. Levi warned him that failure, theft, or clever accounting would end their increasingly profitable relationship very badly. Quint accepted with the expression of a man calculating both commission and survival. Stormwind was buying shipbuilding knowledge, because waiting generations to develop it internally would cost more than gold. After arranging the purchase, Levi remained near Grey Fortress and continued practicing water magic. Klein used the same period to push his own cultivation forward. When Klein reached another major breakthrough, Levi congratulated him and immediately began discussing the copper mine's security. Trouble had already started forming around it. The Dalton family regarded the Grey Mountains as part of a political sphere they could pressure through subordinate nobles. A 6th-tier gold knight carried warnings that Stormwind should abandon claims around the mine. Clay ignored the threat, exactly as Levi expected him to. The other side treated that refusal as weakness and moved to seize the site by force. Levi prepared an ambush instead of arguing about boundaries with men already marching armed troops toward his property. Clay and selected forces took positions around the mine, while Levi coordinated with Klein. The first assault ended with the Dalton side losing professionals before their political message reached anyone important. One 6th-tier knight died after discovering that Stormwind's cavalry officers no longer behaved like minor frontier retainers. News of that death reached higher-ranking Dalton commanders and triggered a larger response. Garford entered the conflict with 7th-tier power and enough confidence to assume Levi could be overwhelmed by rank. Another 7th-tier Earth warrior moved with him, while stronger support hovered around the broader noble confrontation. Levi deliberately met them near the copper mine instead of allowing the fight to spread toward civilians. Klein joined because the dispute threatened Grey Fortress's surrounding balance as much as Stormwind's mining rights. Brennus and other tulip-linked power also watched the confrontation, making the battlefield political before swords even crossed. What was a copper deposit worth once great noble families began sending 7th and 8th-tier professionals toward it. More than copper. By then, Retreat would advertise that Stormwind's territory could be repriced through intimidation. Levi could not afford to establish that dangerous precedent. The battle erupted across the mine approaches with mounted troops, professionals, and high-tier pressure colliding almost simultaneously. Klein intercepted one 7th-tier Earth warrior before the flank could collapse onto Stormwind's cavalry. Garford focused on Levi, having already received reports about 9 Sun's burst and his ranged habits. He avoided the obvious attack lines and prepared for fire. Levi gave Garford lightning instead of the expected fire. Thunder Dragon instant kill flashed across the battlefield too quickly for Garford to dodge cleanly. The spell smashed through his preparation and turned Levi's newly learned talent into its first major battlefield advertisement. Garford had come expecting the Viscount described by yesterday's intelligence. He died fighting the version that had learned something new since then. That was becoming a recurring problem for Levi's enemies. The rest of the battle collapsed after the high-level professionals lost momentum. 34 enemies were captured while the remaining force was killed, scattered, or forced away from the mine. Stormwind kept the copper mine and its surrounding ground. The Dalton family kept a political grievance large enough to become something more formal. Brennus looked at Levi afterward with the exhausted expression of someone watching family politics become open warfare. An earl could not simply launch unrestricted war against a viscount without drawing royal intervention. Noble society had rules precisely because private armies were powerful enough to destroy provinces when grudges escaped control. That protection did not remove danger, it merely forced danger to file paperwork first. Klein returned quickly to Grey Fortress after Levi warned that the mine clash might be part of a wider provocation. That night, Levi spent the essence from 2 slain 7th-tier professionals instead of letting victory sit idle inside the panel. Ultimate power and Unying physique both climbed into their golden stages, multiplying strength and recovery far beyond his previous limits. Golden power amplified physical force, battle aura, and magical mental strength until every existing combat technique suddenly hit harder. Then a new special effect appeared beneath the talent. Flame Body promised greater strength, explosive power, and resistance against fire magic. Levi activated it immediately, because reading about a new ability had never satisfied him for very long. Hard armor spread across his body like cooling magma, crossed by crimson cracks glowing with heat underneath. His blood seemed hotter. His muscles answered faster. Even standing still carried pressure the room had not held moments earlier. Warm enough, Levi said, grinning while the molten-looking shell settled across his arms and chest. The second golden talent was even harder to treat casually. Blood Ember strengthened his blood until external wounds could close almost instantly under ordinary circumstances. That same blood could cling to wounded enemies and interfere with their own regeneration. A recovering monster would no longer enjoy healing freely after Levi managed to make it bleed. Then the panel revealed Resurrection and turned a strong upgrade into a genuine life-saving card. Immortal Ashes could preserve one last chance after a fatal wound, provided Levi was not completely destroyed first. Combined with Blood Ember, that surviving spark could rebuild injuries fast enough to drag him back toward fighting condition. He could even use the ashes on somebody else, though the same flames might kill a body unable to endure them. 2 enemy professionals had died over 1 copper mine. Their essence had just purchased Levi another answer to death. The next morning, military officers gathered before that new power had even stopped feeling unfamiliar. Tulip and Dalton had formally entered a noble duel, Levi told them. The losing patriarch would not simply sign surrender papers. Mia asked whether Stormwind should march immediately to support Angelus. Support with what, Levi asked. If that war reaches us, we may be the ones begging Angelus for reinforcements. Jenkins said waiting still required preparation, because chaos always invited thieves, spies, and opportunists toward weak borders. Exactly, Levi told him. Strengthen patrols, watch the serfs carefully, and treat every unexplained movement as expensive until proven harmless. Parker took responsibility for patrol and serf supervision, while Jenkins pushed the Great Wall toward completion without abandoning farmland. Will and Lowry received orders to train more archers for distribution among infantry companies, instead of creating isolated specialist units. Stormwind would not choose another family's battlefield yet. It would make sure nobody could choose Stormwind's battlefield for them. Then reports arrived showing noble conflicts spreading far beyond Tulip and Dalton, as if someone kept striking sparks across dry grass. Who benefited if Alpha's strongest noble families weakened one another before the next external invasion? Levi's thoughts returned to the dormant serf spy and the scytheworm hidden inside his brain. A ducal-level conspiracy no longer felt like paranoia when ducal-level wars began erupting across the map. He decided the royal family and Church of Dawn needed at least part of what he had discovered. The problem was presenting enough evidence without exposing abilities he refused to reveal. Brennus became the safest intermediary, because Tulip interests would suffer if the kingdom collapsed into manipulated civil conflict. Levi told her he had found signs pointing toward a major internal conspiracy, but lacked proof acceptable to the crown. He described suspicious methods and connections without explaining every detail of his own interrogation tools. Brennus took the warning seriously enough to carry it onward. Levi asked that both the royal family and church investigate before another hidden faction turned unrest into open rebellion. Then he went back to water magic, because worrying about dukes did not increase his survival chances by itself. Fifth Circle water spells filled another gap in his magical development. When the final structures settled into his water magic tower, a new talent appeared. Water Sword Flying Flowers gave Levi a control-oriented spell rather than another simple blast. He finally possessed stronger methods for restricting high-level opponents instead of only racing them toward death. The new talent also meant his magical foundation was ready for the next rank. Yet his chaos meditation technique had only progressed partway through the 5th tier requirement. Natural cultivation alone would take too long for a kingdom beginning to fracture around him. Levi turned toward ancient wizard potions and the accumulated resources Stormwind had gathered. He would cultivate with potions while continuing to adapt wizard methods through the panel. Stormwind's administration received another command at the same time: prepare strict disease control measures. Reports from Maka Fortress suggested plague was spreading through another region. Jenkins began cleaning settlements, tightening sanitation, and preparing isolation before any infected travelers reached Stormwind. A plague killed farmers just as efficiently as orcs and required no siege equipment. The territory could not afford to treat disease as somebody else's problem until coughing began inside its own walls. Then, right as Stormwind regained its footing, Levi tested another ancient artifact recovered through his expanding magical research. The Golden Mirror promised spatial movement far beyond what ordinary travel could accomplish. He activated the artifact south of Stormwind City and felt space twist around the mirror's surface. A spatial vortex opened with enough force to drag the artifact and Levi through before he could reconsider. The transition ended with him on the ground, dizzy enough to question whether instant travel actually saved time. Once his head stopped spinning, the value became obvious. Distance that demanded horses, roads, or flying beasts could now collapse under the right conditions. Levi also examined newly acquired Storm Dragon armor and other 6th-tier equipment around this period. The armor offered exceptional magical defense, making it one of his strongest personal protective sets. He tested additional equipment that increased speed by roughly 30%. Every enhancement stacked onto a body already strengthened by talents, body refining, and 5th-tier knight power. Levi began wondering why modern magical artifact technology had not produced cheaper standardized weapons more widely. Magical artifacts consumed less energy than many enchanted alternatives, yet production remained concentrated among limited forces. That question became another item for John and future researchers rather than an answer Levi could invent alone. By the Dawn Festival, his potion-assisted magical cultivation had nearly reached the 6th-tier threshold. He estimated only a few more doses would be needed. For once, Stormwind's immediate surroundings seemed calm enough for Levi to gather core members and discuss their progress. He asked about cultivation, families, staffing, and problems that battlefield reports rarely recorded. Cohesion did not appear automatically because everyone survived the same wars. Officers needed reasons to believe their futures remained connected to Stormwind after rewards were distributed. That quiet work ended when a messenger delivered an urgent letter from Klein. Levi recognized the handwriting before finishing the seal. Grey Fortress was in trouble again, and this time the threat had entered wearing royal authority. Diang, commander of a reserve battalion, had secretly opened the fortress to an 8th-tier sky warrior. The intruder claimed to represent the newly proclaimed King Paul and demanded control of Grey Fortress. Klein rejected the order because Paul's succession did not follow legitimate procedure. Diang responded by turning reserve forces against the fortress commander from inside the defenses. Klein and several loyal officers escaped into the unending wind and fire array Levi had installed earlier. The formation became their final shelter while an 8th-tier enemy tried to force control of the fortress. Klein had managed to send one urgent message before the net closed. He sent it to Stormwind, because one person nearby possessed a 9th-tier ally who could arrive before politics finished killing everyone. Levi folded the letter and went straight toward Panda. This was no longer a dispute over mines or a reserve battalion's ambition. Somebody had declared Paul king while Edward II's fate remained unclear. And whoever controlled Grey Fortress clearly expected the northern frontier to accept that change at swordpoint. Panda complained about being summoned for another human crisis, until Levi explained that Grey Fortress might already be falling. The giant bear stopped complaining once the words 8th-tier intruder entered the conversation. They crossed the distance fast enough that Diang's faction had little time to prepare for saint-level intervention. Inside Grey Fortress, Klein remained trapped behind the unending wind and fire array with loyal officers. Diang demanded the 7th-tier magical crossbows and tried to consolidate control before outside forces arrived. He insisted that Paul was now king and anyone resisting royal command was committing treason. Klein answered that succession required procedure, not a messenger carrying convenient orders after an unexplained death. The argument ended the moment Panda's aura appeared over the fortress. The 8th-tier Sky Warrior sent to take control made one extremely intelligent decision. The 8th-tier Sky Warrior turned around and ran immediately. There was no reason to defend a half-secured fortress against a 9th-tier sacred beast whose patience was famously unreliable. Panda pursued while Levi moved through the chaos toward Klein's position. Reserve troops who had supported Diang suddenly discovered that political conviction weakens when saint-level pressure lands nearby. Loyal soldiers reoccupied critical sections as the internal rebellion unraveled faster than it had begun. Levi wanted surviving high-level enemies captured where possible. Information about Kanglan City was now more valuable than killing every traitor on site. One 6th-tier warrior ended up alive and inside Levi's Dominator contract. Panda watched the enslavement with visible discomfort even though he had seen the method before. The bear still remembered how weak Levi had been when they first met. If Levi had possessed this contract and current power back then, Panda's entire life might have become contract paperwork. That thought made him unusually quiet for several seconds. Levi interrogated the prisoner and learned that the situation in the capital was worse than Grey Fortress had heard. Paul had been preparing for years, with supporters placed across central military and administrative structures. After announcing succession, his faction seized 3 central legions and roughly half of a mage corps. Yet the story remained incomplete, especially around Edward II, Queen Catherine, and several 9th-tier royal figures. Prince Redman and Reverend Nelson were not even in Kanglan City when the coup unfolded. That absence made Levi more suspicious rather than less. He decided Grey Fortress alone could not provide enough information. Panda carried him directly toward Viscount Leon instead of returning to Stormwind. Leon's political instincts had kept his family alive through wars, rebellions, and changing royal priorities. If anyone nearby had reliable rumors without committing to a side too early, it would be him. Before Levi arrived, agents aligned with the new regime had already approached Viscount Leon as well. They warned that Levi traveled with Panda and should be handled carefully. Leon listened without promising enough to become trapped by his own words. When Levi appeared, the Viscount greeted him calmly and avoided pretending he possessed certainty he lacked. Levi asked directly what had happened in Kanglan City. Leon confirmed fragments involving Paul, military control, and disappearance or movement of key royal figures. Prince Hasavi had apparently left Kanglan City with the royal knights soon after the crisis began. That mattered because Hasavi commanded the royal order and had enormous influence over professional soldiers. Thompson's position remained unclear enough that nobody with sense wanted to declare the succession finished. Leon refused to exaggerate intelligence he could not verify. Levi appreciated that restraint because bad information during a coup killed faster than weak armor. He and Panda returned toward Grey Fortress with more questions than answers. Klein had already suppressed the remaining reserve rebellion by the time they arrived. The fortress was secure physically. Politically, the entire northern frontier had begun splitting under its feet. Prince Arthur announced from Frostmoon City that Paul had murdered the king and usurped the throne. The Northeast Army prepared to march south and punish the eldest prince. Other royal branches issued statements of their own, each carrying armies large enough to turn accusation into geography. Levi looked at the fortress map and saw every road becoming a potential civil war supply line. Stormwind had spent years preparing for orcs from the north. Now human armies might approach from every direction while claiming to defend the same kingdom. Levi returned to his own cultivation before choosing any political commitment he could not reverse. The last potions pushed his chaos meditation technique across the 6th tier threshold. Levi became a 6th tier Archmage while already possessing 5th tier Silver Knight power. His daily attribute point gain jumped again, though other panel functions remained largely familiar. Energy essence from earlier battles waited for future talent improvements while his spell system opened another ring of possibilities. Wind Illusion Shadow and other divine gifts now sat beside increasingly mature elemental talents. Ultimate speed had already reached its golden stage, making his mobility absurd even before magical support. Advancement did not answer the political question. It simply made Levi harder to kill while considering it. Klein soon delivered the answer nobody could avoid much longer. The royal civil war had begun openly. Thompson moved with forces linked to Earl Clinton and his own Warcraft Knights squadron toward Kanglan City. Several royal branches denounced Paul as a usurper and recognized Thompson's claim instead. Earl Franken and the Marquess of Romance publicly supported Thompson, increasing his legitimacy among nobles. Paul answered with declarations from commanders already under his influence. 5 of the 8 frontline reserve legions eventually recognized Paul's royal status. The other northern formations hesitated, waiting to see whether loyalty meant protecting law bloodline or the winning army. Then Prince Hasavi stopped the rumors from hiding behind polite language. Paul murdered Edward II and Queen Catherine, Hasavi accused publicly. This is usurpation wearing a royal seal. He named Zachary among the dead and identified Rosier as one of the saint-level figures involved in the coup. Another 9th tier paladin had fought beside Rosier, though Hasavi could not yet give the kingdom a trusted name. According to Hasavi, Reverend Nelson was absent and Redman had already been pulled away from Kanglan City. The timing made the capital look less like a sudden succession crisis and more like an operation prepared around missing defenders. Yet Paul's planners had overlooked one change that ruined the clean ending they expected. Hasavi had already crossed into the 9th tier Holy Domain. When the coup turned murderous, he gathered the Royal Knights and half the Royal Mage Order before Paul could seal every exit. 2 Earth Dragon Knight squads bought the escape force time by intercepting Saint-level pursuers outside the capital. That announcement reached Pix, while he was still trying to keep the Narrant family from tearing itself apart. One dead Royal Saint was already too many. More 9th tier relatives killing each other would destroy the family from inside. But Zachary's reported murder erased Pix's remaining patience. Stay neutral after this, Pix told his officers, and neutrality becomes another word for helping the man who started it. He ordered the Northern Legion south before another messenger could offer him a softer version of the same bloodshed. 3 frontline legions that had been hesitating changed sides once Pix and Hasavi stood openly against Paul. Commanders stopped asking which prince sounded legitimate and started counting which saints might arrive above their camps. Across the opposing camp, Paul raged that the northern front had slipped from his control before succession could be secured. A mysterious ally told him 2 9th tier experts were already being sent north to contain Hasavi and Pix. Rosier answered with something colder than reassurance. I agreed to remove Redman's faction, Rosier said. I did not agree to butcher our own foundation until nothing remained. He warned Paul that killing Zachary and igniting full royal civil war could leave the winning king ruling an emptied family. Paul still needed victory before Redman returned, because Redman's prestige could pull wavering armies away with frightening speed. So declarations became marching orders, and marching orders became battle lines before most civilians understood which king existed. 4 main northern legions and all 8 frontline reserve corps were dragged into the royal conflict. The same army system built to stop orc invasions was now feeding soldiers south against itself. Every banner claimed loyalty to Alpha while another piece of Alpha's northern shield disappeared down the road. What would happen if the orcs learned how empty northern roads had become? Every faction claimed to be saving Alpha. Every marching legion weakened the same northern shield. Klein received orders to lead the 8th Battalion and mage units back toward Frostmoon City. Grey Fortress could not remain leaderless, so command passed temporarily to Levi. The exile who once arrived there begging for supplies now controlled the fortress, protecting his entire frontier corridor. That promotion came without ceremony and carried far more danger than the Viscount title. Levi inspected defenses, supplies, magical crossbows, and the reliability of remaining officers before deciding anything else. He would not let Grey Fortress become another prize captured by whichever prince sent the fastest forged order. Stormwind's 9th tier panda remained the unspoken reason most nearby factions hesitated to pressure Levi directly. Yet even Panda could not be everywhere if the kingdom divided into dozens of battlefronts. News from the south kept arriving faster than maps could be updated. Thompson gathered more forces around Earl Clinton, while Paul fortified positions around central territories. Royal armies that had trained together for decades now faced each other behind different banners. Former comrades knew one another's tactics, supply habits, officers, and weaknesses. Civil war offered none of the clean ignorance that sometimes protected soldiers against foreign enemies. Levi refused to rush Grey Fortress into Thompson's camp simply because Arthur had already chosen him. He wanted guarantees protecting Frostmoon Province and the frontier nobles before spending Stormwind levs on a prince. Local noble interests mattered because those families would still live beside one another after the throne changed hands. Viscount Leon held enough regional weight that his position could shape several lesser families. Stormwind carried military strength, magical weapons, and Panda. Together, those 2 Viscount territories could influence Frostmoon Province far beyond their formal titles. Levi began sounding out the province rather than declaring loyalty by emotion. His reasoning was cold. Whoever became king still needed the northern frontier functioning afterward. A ruined Frostmoon Province would make every surviving noble poorer even if their chosen prince won. Paul's faction tried stabilizing its own military position before the northern forces could converge. Rosier argued that destroying too much royal strength would leave the throne meaningless even after victory. He wanted the conflict contained, with defections and targeted pressure replacing endless destruction where possible. But another faction around Paul wanted Thompson removed decisively. A powerful ducal family stood ready to intervene if the correct moment arrived. Levi did not yet know which duke stood behind that shadow. His old suspicion about a ducal traitor remained unresolved, waiting for events to name the family for him. Soon, southern nobles began choosing sides across the kingdom. Some had spent years resenting how many kingdom resources flowed toward the northern frontier. Weakening northern armies during a succession war served their interests even if loyalty slogans claimed something nobler. Earl Randall declared for Paul and attacked Earl Clinton despite recent mediation between their territories. The Marquis of Fox also supported Paul and moved forces to intercept nobles aligned with Thompson. More armies assembled across provinces that had barely recovered from earlier conflict. Noble family calculations layered over royal succession until nobody fought for only one reason anymore. Some defended Paul, some hated Thompson, some wanted northern power reduced, some simply smelled territory. Levi watched the alignments and recognized the same pattern he had seen around his copper mine. Public reasons were banners, real motives traveled underneath them. Frostmoon nobles held their own meeting as pressure mounted. Arthur wanted a clear answer before southern coalitions could isolate the northern armies one province at a time. Levi argued for concentrating strength instead of scattering every noble contingent across separate fronts. Frostmoon Province's alliance could hold Earl Roy's pressure while Arthur reinforced the larger royal battlefield. The Northeast Legion and 6th Legion should join forces with the Northern Legion before Roosevelt's coalition fully arrived. Then they could strike hard through Sidamia Province while the opportunity remained. Leon listened carefully and eventually supported the broader plan after negotiating protections for local interests. Levi also demanded assurances from Arthur rather than donating troops through patriotic enthusiasm. Arthur agreed because refusing powerful frontier viscounts would cost more than granting reasonable terms. Stormwind's political value had finally caught up with its military value. The same lord once sent to die now negotiated how royal armies would move through his region. Prince Arthur marched with the Northeast and 6th Legions while Frostmoon nobles prepared to hold their own approaches. The combined offensive gained ground quickly before some southern reinforcements could complete concentration. Roosevelt's coalition halted once the battlefield shifted faster than expected. For several days, Thompson's camp finally appeared to possess strategic momentum. That was exactly when the war changed shape again. A 9th-tier assassin entered the succession struggle directly. The leader of the Divine Eye Society moved with a saint-level mage against Prince Thompson. Redman's influence, royal forces, and northern armies meant little if the claimant himself died. The strike reached Thompson before his camp could convert battlefield gains into a finished war. News spread across the northern coalition in fragments, each version worse than the last. Every new report repeated the same claim: Prince Thompson was dead. The Phoenix family immediately declared public support for Paul. Levi stared at the report and felt every earlier suspicion about a hidden duke suddenly acquire a name. If the Phoenix family had planned this with Paul, then the coup was never just a fight between brothers. Thompson's reported death hit his coalition harder than any lost fortress could have done. Royal troops hesitated because their declared claimant had vanished from the board in a single assassination. Some nobles immediately began calculating whether continuing the war still served anything beyond revenge. The Phoenix family announced that Paul was now Edward's only remaining heir and demanded an end to fighting. The timing made their neutrality impossible to believe. They had just finished fighting the Naga, freed their attention, and entered the civil war exactly when Thompson fell. Levi read the announcement in Rafi province and began preparing for the possibility of retreat. His earlier suspicion about a duke cooperating with the Shadow King's network now pointed directly toward Phoenix. If the royal family and church had no countermeasure, staying trapped deep inside a losing coalition would be suicide. Yet another report complicated the entire picture before Levi could decide how far to withdraw. Redman and Crawford had intercepted Divine Eye forces outside Maryland province during the operations surrounding Thompson. Publicly, the second prince was dead. Elsewhere, the kingdom's strongest old fox was already moving against the assassins. What exactly had happened during that supposed successful strike? Levi had no answer yet, and uncertainty was becoming more dangerous than either prince. The Phoenix intervention frightened several southern nobles who had only wanted to weaken northern power. Marcus Fox and Earl Roosevelt withdrew their armies rather than remain inside a conflict now smelling like organized manipulation. Both families immediately began investigating whether hidden interests had steered them into somebody else's plan. Earl Roy and Earl Randall did not follow. Randall continued clashing with Earl Clinton, while Roy committed another legion against Rafi province. The Civil War did not end. It simply stopped having one clean center. Paul tried to seize the political moment with a sweeping proclamation. Fighting should cease, he announced, and participants would not be punished for actions taken during the internal conflict. Compensation would be paid, and support for the northern frontier against future orc invasions would continue. It was exactly the message frightened officers wanted to hear. It was also exactly the message a usurper would send after his strongest rival supposedly died. Levi trusted the timing less than the promises. Far from Stormwind, another confrontation exposed motives hidden beneath the royal succession itself. Rosier traveled alone to the Andorra front and found Pix. He told Pix to stop the fighting because the Narrant royal family could no longer survive tearing itself apart. Pix's accumulated anger erupted the moment Rosier spoke. "Now you care about internal damage," Pix snapped, after helping trigger the coup and killing Zachary. Whether Paul or Thompson inherited Edward's throne should never have justified saint-level bloodshed inside their own family. For a long moment, Rosier's answer made the conflict feel older than the coup itself. He said the reason had always been Redman. Redman's faction held privileges inside the royal family that Rosier believed no single branch should possess. Ordinary descendants fought for military merit simply to preserve noble status. Redman's descendants held hereditary princely status powerful enough to stand above ordinary royal competition. Sanctuary figures supposedly avoided politics, yet Rosier claimed Redman's approval influenced decisions like an unseen crown. Pix listened until the bitterness beneath those complaints finally acquired a dead man's name. The dead man's name behind that hatred was Farmar. Rosier had never forgiven what happened to Farmar, a talent he believed could have reached 9th tier or even legendary. Arthur received placement with the elite 1st Battalion of the Northeast Army. Farmar was sent instead toward dangerous Grey Fortress and eventually died. Rosier believed Redman had favored Arthur because Farmar's talent threatened Arthur's path. Pix said that interpretation was wrong and tried to explain the circumstances. Rosier refused to hear another explanation from Pix. He had once wanted Farmar retained within the Royal Mage Order, But Redman rejected that arrangement too. Years of grief had turned every decision into another piece of the same accusation. Then Rosier pointed toward Hasavi's recent advancement. Where had Hasavi obtained the 9th tier breakthrough artifact his recorded merits could not obviously buy? Pix had no convincing answer to give him. That silence did more damage than another argument would have done. Rosier admitted that Redman remained the person he truly wanted dead. Zachary's death, he claimed, had been an accident beyond his intended target. Hasavi and Arthur could keep their positions, though Rosier wanted Arthur's descendants treated like ordinary royal branches afterward. He even said personal revenge against him was acceptable, provided nobody used royal armies for it. Pix called Rosier insane for pursuing Redman now. Kill Redman now, Pix warned, and the Phoenix family might simply place its own figure into the vacuum afterward. Paul had already cooperated with Phoenix far more deeply than Rosier seemed willing to admit. What happened when the man who removed one privileged faction accidentally crowned another? Rosier called the alliance temporary and argued the Narrant family could clean its internal disease after surviving the crisis. He described the Civil War as a terrible price for removing a deeper problem. Then spatial ripples suddenly spread through the air beside them. A familiar voice asked what exactly Rosier considered the best possible outcome. Both 9th tier professionals froze when they recognized the voice. The man emerging through the spatial distortion was supposed to be dead. Zachary stepped onto the battlefield alive before their stunned eyes. Rosier stared at him with the expression of someone watching his entire conspiracy rearrange itself in one breath. Pix demanded proof before allowing hope to override sense. Zachary used his unique 9th tier holy technique. The question ended immediately. No imposter could reproduce a saint-level sacred technique bound to one professional. Pix's anger cracked apart and became stunned relief instead. Rosier did not look relieved at all. Zachary's survival meant the coup had contained a layer he had never been allowed to see. Redman had sent a message through the supposedly dead paladin. If Farmar was truly the reason for Rosier's rebellion, Redman would explain everything after the crisis ended. Rosier laughed without any trace of amusement remaining. He accused Redman of constructing an enormous trap and even using Edward II as bait. Zachary corrected that assumption with a cold answer. The trap was not built for Rosier, he simply did not matter enough. Edward had known his remaining life was limited and entered the plan voluntarily. That answer changed the scale of the entire royal crisis. If Edward knowingly participated, then the apparent collapse inside Kanglan City had been allowed to develop for a reason. Rosier finally saw the direction of the blade hidden behind the throne struggle. The true target behind Redman's enormous trap was Phoenix. The royal family had not merely failed to notice the ducal conspiracy. Redman had apparently been creating conditions designed to force it into the open. Rosier's coup, his anger, Paul's ambition, and Edward's apparent vulnerability had all become pieces inside a larger trap. The battlefield seemed to pause around 2 rebels and one supposedly dead paladin trapped inside plans nested within plans. Rosier laughed once, then again as the scale of his misreading finally settled over him. He had believed he was removing Redman's influence. Redman had used his rebellion to expose somebody more dangerous. Zachary told him to return and secure the Central Legion and Royal Mage Order for the Narrant family. Those forces were too important to leave drifting between Paul Phoenix and collapsing loyalties. Rosier mocked Redman's habit of extracting value from people even after they turned against him. Still, he agreed to protect the Narrant family's military foundation. He insisted he had never intended to betray the family itself. In his mind, Redman alone had forced this outcome and remained the only man he could never forgive. Rosier refused any meeting, any explanation, and any reconciliation over Farmar. Then Rosier teleported away before either man could continue. Pix watched the empty space where he had stood and could only sigh. The kingdom's public story still said Thompson was dead and Paul had become the remaining heir. Behind that story, Zachary was alive and Redman's trap had begun showing its shape. Outside that private confrontation, Alpha still moved according to an older story. Thompson was publicly dead, Paul occupied Kanglan City, and armies were already killing each other over conclusions missing half the truth. Zachary's survival changed none of those marching orders overnight. It changed something more dangerous, the reason behind the crisis. Redman had apparently allowed weakness to appear around the throne so Phoenix would finally move openly. Rosier had believed he was attacking Redman's grip on the Narrant family. Instead, his rebellion had become another pressure point forcing a deeper faction into daylight. Pix watched him leave knowing persuasion had failed, yet Rosier had still promised to protect the Central Legion and Royal Mage Order. That promise could preserve the Narrant family's foundation while its princes continued tearing at the crown. Far north, Grey Fortress remained under Levi's temporary control while royal orders arrived carrying loyalties nobody could verify safely. The same walls once meant to block orcs now guarded roads every human faction wanted available. Levi had spent years learning how to survive enemies approaching from outside. This war offered uniforms, seals, noble bloodlines, and perfectly legal orders as camouflage. What happens when obeying the wrong royal command can destroy a territory faster than refusing it? Stormwind could no longer treat court politics as distant noise behind safer northern battles. Somebody had turned succession itself into a trap. Phoenix had finally stepped from behind the curtain. And somewhere inside that movement, Redman's hidden blade was still waiting.